Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. We're back from session. The joint oversight hearing is called to order. Before I recognize my colleagues, I would like to recognize the committee chairs that are seated here as well. This joint oversight hearing, Vice Speaker Tony Ada, who is the committee chair for Land, Environment, Housing, Agriculture, Parks, and Infrastructure, and also Senator Sabrina Salas Matanani, who chairs the Committee on Health and Veterans Affairs. Thank you very much. I'd also like to welcome my Vice Chair, Senator Duenas, Chris Duenas, thank you for joining us. Senator Gumatautau, thank you for joining us. Senator Vince Borja, thank you for joining us. Shelley Calvo, also a co-vice chair of my committee. Thank you, Senator Calvo. Senator Theresa C, thank you. And Senator Sabina Flores, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Paris, I'm sorry. I mess that up all the time. Thank you again for being here, and Senator Tello Taitigui, who's joining us this morning as well. The purpose of this joint oversight hearing is to address a serious and growing public concern regarding the detection of Dieldrin in Guam's water system. Over the past several weeks, our offices have received numerous calls, messages, and public inquiries. These are not just statistics or routine complaints. These are genuine expressions of fear and uncertainty from families across the island. They want to know one simple thing: is our water safe to drink? That question alone should concern all of us. It is not a question that any community should have to ask in 2025. It tells us that there has been a breakdown somewhere, whether in testing, monitoring, communication, or coordination. And it is our duty as lawmakers to find out where and why and how we can fix it. This hearing was called because the people of Guam deserve answers, not assumptions. They deserve to know the truth about what is in our water, what the risks are, and what the government is doing to protect each and every one of us. Let me be clear, this is not about placing blame. This is about responsibility, transparency, and accountability. It is about ensuring that our agencies, the Guam Waterworks Authority, the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Public Health and Social Service, are all working in full coordination, sharing data, communicating clearly, and acting swiftly to safeguard the health of every resident on this island. Dieldrin is a banned pesticide, one that should have should have no place in our environment, and let alone our water our people use every single day. Its detection raises serious questions about historical contamination, infrastructure maintenance, and environmental oversight. Today, this legislature seeks clear and direct answers to the following. How extensive is the contamination? How did it happen? And when was it first discovered? What testing protocols are currently in place? What actions are being taken to ensure our water remains safe right now and in the future? Before we move on, I'd like to remind everyone in attendance of the Institute and Guam's general rules of conduct. Individuals testifying first shall be recognized by the chairperson before speaking and shall state their full name and title for the record. All questions and testimony must remain relevant to today's agenda, and I ask that all participants maintain proper decorum throughout the proceedings. With that, I'd like to turn over, Ms. Vice Speaker, would you want to have any opening statements? You know, okay, and neither, okay. We'll go ahead and open up with from the agencies, the presentations, and we can go down since former Senator. We'll start with you. Okay.
Good morning, Senator Simon Sanchez, CCU board member.
Good morning, Senators. Thomas Cruz, Assistant General Manager for Operations with the Guam Waterworks Authority, but I am currently the acting General Manager while our General Manager is off island.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Chairwoman, and Mr. Chair, there we are, Mr. Vice Speaker. Theresa Rojas, Counsel for the Guam Waterworks Authority.
Good morning, Chairman, Vice Speaker, Honorable Senators, Michelle Lastimoza, Administrator for Guam EPA.
Sierra Armstrong Bettis, Environmental Health Specialist 1 at Guam EPA. Thank you, Senators.
Buenas tardes, Samsus, Honorable Senators and Chair. Pete Bautista with Guam EPA, the Water Division Chief Engineer.
Okay. Do we have anybody from Public Health? Eight.
Half a day Chair, Vice Speaker Adder, and Senators of the 38th Guam Legislature. My name is Patrick Soto. I'm the Territorial Epidemiologist with the Department of Public Health and Social Services.
Okay. Okay, we can start with Waterworks or CCU, whichever.
Mr. Chairman, we'll let our management
Okay.
team take the lead on this.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Sergeant Arms will swear everybody in, please.
You can please stand and raise your right hand.
Anyone that's in the audience that will be testifying as well, could you please stand and might be testifying, might be called up?
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. Mr. Chair, under the oath, you may proceed.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. GWA has a brief presentation essentially on the subject of Dieldrin. And there you go. All right. So today we're going to go over some timelines, some actions, and conclude with the presentation, and then follow up with questions and answers. So we can just move forward through, let's say slide 4. All right. So a little bit background regarding Dieldrin. From the 1950s to the late 1960s, Dieldrin and other popular pesticide chemicals are in peak use around the world by farmers and communities. Thank you. By the 1970s, health concerns regarding Dieldrin rises, prompting the U.S. Department of Agriculture to cancel all use of Dieldrin. Subsequent to that, Dieldrin is still being used as a termiticide in the 70s, but was ultimately banned in 1987 by U.S. EPA as a hazard to the environment and human health. All right. Next slide. Now, despite being a persistent pesticide, there was still no regulations for Dieldrin throughout the 1990s, although it being banned in 1987. Right. So sometime in the 2000s, U.S. EPA was considering, regulations related to Dieldrin in the drinking water. But in 2003, the U.S. EPA determines not to enact any primary drinking water regulations for Dieldrin in 2003. Now, although there were no federal regulations for treatment, GWA continued to remain compliant with the Safe Drinking Water Act by testing for other organic pesticides, which included Dieldrin. This data is public, and reports are submitted to both US EPA and Guam EPA as required by law. Next slide. So as required, again, by the Safe Drinking Water Act, GWA has continued to provide customer results of our findings via our annual water quality report. Reports are sent to every customer and made available on GWA's website, starting with data from 2007 to current. Our water quality reports, as I just added, are mailed out to each customer. Now, in 2012, there was an inspection from US EPA's NEIC group. But in 2012, the US EPA notified GWA and Guam EPA of the presence of dieldrin in Guam's groundwater, but does not provide any guidance or corrective action required for treatment of dieldrin. Essentially, there's just a notification, right, that there's the presence, which we have been documenting via our water quality reports. Now, through 2016 through 2022, right, there's still no guidelines, federal or otherwise, on dieldrin corrective actions. Dieldrin continues to be a federally unregulated contaminant under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Next slide. Now, in December 2020, Guam EPA's authority to establish an interim action level in a public water system was granted. Now, this authority allows Guam EPA to set an action level for contaminants that do not have federally established MCLs when Guam EPA identifies these contaminants are present unacceptable health risks, right? Now, in 2022, the Guam EPA, after being advised of the potential risks associated with the presence of dieldrin by the US EPA, informs GWA it will evaluate whether regulations would be needed to address any risks. Now, in late 2023, Guam EPA notifies GWA its intent to prepare guidance for GWA to take action and comply with regulations on dieldrin. Next slide, please. Now, again, in 2023, we were given notice of an intent to prepare something. But in 2023, GWA engineering teams, began initial planning for construction of systems for and treatment of dieldrin in anticipation of future regulations. At that time, there was 3 wells that were noted of concern, our Y15, D17, and M4 production wells. Again, Guam EPA had indicated that there's concerns with these particular wells. Now, throughout 2023 and into 2024, GWA teams continued preparing for possible regulations and guidance being developed by Guam EPA. It wasn't until late 2024 when Guam EPA detailed their proposed regulations and action levels. Now, this draft was used to complete the design work for the treatment systems to effectively treat dieldrin. Now, in 2024, GWA was provided for review a draft risk assessment document and proposed regulations from Guam EPA. Next slide, please. Now, GWA continues with our engineering work, but GWA put the construction project out to bid after completing the design. An IFB was issued on February 27, 2025, and bids were due on April 21st, 2025. And moving on, GWA is informed on July 5th, 2025, that the systems of the Guam EPA board approved to enact the proposed regulations. The approved regulations would take effect August 1st, 2025. Now, given this notifications, GWA had met with the GGO mayor, GDOE superintendent, and public health to coordinate mitigation efforts at the Upi Elementary ahead of the do not drink without treatment notification. I'd like to point out on the last bullet there that the engineering, essentially the construction, right? There's designs and then there's a construction bid. But ultimately the construction package going through the appropriate procurement procedures. The construction package was ultimately approved in September of 2025. But around that time is also when GWA issued a do not drink without treatment notice in a joint advisory with Guam EPA for the customers affected by our production well Y15 specifically. All right. Now, subsequent to all of this efforts, GWA had launched a new microsite to better inform the public on Dieldrin. On October 3rd, 2025, essentially as part of our multifaceted approach to keep the general public informed about Dieldrin and the efforts behind immediate remedies and more permanent solution. In addition, our general manager made a public presentation with the Mayor's Council on October 1st, 2025, to brief the mayors on issues related to GWA's water treatment plans for Dieldrin, remedy, and solutions. Now, GWA continues its efforts to support the public by the public in affected areas by providing water stations and bottled water on October 2nd for safe use. These efforts will be ongoing as needed for remedies and immediate relief to affected customers. GWA provides also filter installation and reimbursement program. These are point of entry systems that are at residence. Now, for affected customers, GWA launched in October 2025 a point of entry, filter installation, and or reimbursement program. For customers on filter purchases starting September 12th to the present. It's an ongoing program. Right. On October 10th, we'd like to know that GWA completed a successful installation of an interim treatment at our Y15 production well in Jigo. This installation is the necessary first step for Guam EPA to lift the do not drink without treatment advisory. On October 17th, GWA received initial sampling results indicating that the GAC treatment is effective with no Dieldrin detected in water after the GAC treatment. All right. So we continue to collect and we will continue to collect and submit water sampling for testing and reporting to the Guam EPA until early November 25 when the affected areas serviced by Y15. Now, assuming that all our samples still show no Dieldrin detected, GWA will request from the Guam EPA to lift the no drinking water treatment advisory for affected customers served by Y15. I'm sorry, can we... Next slide. No, can we move to the next slide? I'm sorry, this... You're right. Yeah, this is the slide that I apologize. We had an earlier version. The version that I have was excluding the previous slide. So on the screen right now is essentially that what I just noted, the GAC treatment's results. The water prior to going into the GAC treatment was reading 1.7 nanograms per liter, right? As you can see in the text there, after the vessels, essentially after vessel A and B, there was no GAC. There was no Dieldrin detected, essentially showing that the GAC system that we have currently there is working, and that water being pushed into the distribution system has no Dieldrin in it. Now, this analysis was performed by Eurofins, a US EPA certified laboratory in California, using EPA method 5.2 procedures to determine for determination of organic compounds in finished drinking water, source water, and drinking water stages. Next slide, please. This ultimately is just an illustration of the results that we got from the laboratory. Again, prior to the GAC system, there was presence of Dieldrin at 1.7 and 1.6 respectively. And then after the filters, the GAC filters, it's no detection. It's stated there below the blue text. Right, so if I can go to the next slide. Essentially, I'm just going to summarize the next slide. Essentially, I'm just summarizing kind of all that happened. Now, we're on the screen essentially is just pictures of the activities that occurred on the left side. The interim GAC system, right? We had our contractor on board in September, if I remember correctly, already doing the foundation for the system. Top picture on the right is essentially the GAC system. That picture is important because you can see the crane. It's lifting the GAC material, which is going to be placed into the vessels. And then on the bottom right picture is essentially if you can notice it, maybe you can see it there, this vessel A and vessel B. All right, again, when you look back at the results, that's the where the samples were taken. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Sorry. These again were just more pictures of the efforts in getting the interim system up and running with GWA personnel working tirelessly. And then on the bottom left pictures is actually GWA and Guam EPA at the site going over sampling procedures. Again, sorry, next slide. So I think this might be my last slide, but ultimately, you know, our GAC system that is at Y15 is, you know, in effect, but along with that, right, GWA had put out water tankers, fill stations as part of our interim levels. On the bottom right-hand corner, you can see this is GWA personnel, along with, if I'm not mistaken, at the Jigo Mayor's or the Jigo Gym, helping with the distribution of bottled water to affected customers. The picture on the left is our microsite that is, you know, is intended to put all the information out with regards to Dieldrin on the site, so the public is, you know, just continue to be informed. Next slide. In addition, right, I'm sorry, these particular slides are, you know, again, the you know, it's information that's regarding to the POE program, right, as well as the bottled water program that's still ongoing, as well as just public outreach from the governor's office about this matter. Right, and I believe that's my last slide, Chairman. So we'd be happy to answer any questions if you're not
yes,
going to.
And yes, we would do the round of questions with every agency. And the panel have 5-minute questions so we can get things moving on. Mr. Cruz, 5 minutes, please. 5 minutes on the clock. Mr. Cruz, GWA was first notified, of course, by U.S. EPA in 2012 about the presence of Dieldrin in Guam's water. Yet, you kind of explained a little bit, but yet the first public notice or do not drink without treatment advisory wasn't issued until 2025, 13 years later. Can you explain to this body and to the public why it took so long, and what steps, if any, were taken between 2012 and 2023 to address the issue or to notify the community of maybe the possible exposure?
Chairman, so the notification in 2012, again, as I pointed out, that from US EPA was a notification that there is Dieldrin. At that time, the extent of what Dieldrin was for us as the water service provider was not known. There's no regulations, and so if there's no regulations for us to follow, it's essentially would have been premature for GW to even say or do anything at the time in 2012. As noted, like in the timeline, the subject of Dieldrin had popped up in two occasions, in 2012 and 2022, right? But in between, all of that, I mean, we were reporting Dieldrin because that was a part of our requirement under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but without any regulations to follow, there wouldn't be anything for us to have done at the time.
So you're saying that US EPA did not issue then any regulations, although it was detected and it was detected in our water, they didn't advise you to tell the public, I mean, there's this in the water and you may want to take precautions on that? I mean, nothing at all from US EPA?
That is correct.
Yeah, there's still no national standard, no US EPA standard for the presence of Dieldrin in the water. There's no standard.
Okay.
And we had to create the standard, and the legislature gave GEPA the permission to create the standard. So even though we're sending out these regular notices to ratepayers and to US EPA and GEPA, US EPA said in 2012, hey, we're noticing Dieldrin, but did not order us to do anything. And as you know, we're under a consent decree, and when US EPA wants us to do something, they order us to do something. But in this unique case, for this one particular contaminant, there is, to this day, no national standard. To me, it's very similar to PFAS. We've been drinking Tupperware water since we were all kids. No one knew that PFAS was a challenge until it became, and this is the buzzword, an emerging contaminant. So we're realizing years later that contaminants can emerge that were not considered contaminants before, or if they were considered a contaminant, the level of contamination had not been established, or if it had been established, it's in the water, but it's not a health risk as determined by professionals at GEPA or US EPA or public health. I mean, even the Navy now has announced that there's traces of Dieldrin in their water. They haven't shut it down. They're saying it's below the standard we set, right? Because there's no national standard, right? And so the biggest, we share the same, you summarized the concern, Senator Lujan, Mr. Chair, of all of us. We got to make sure that the water is safe to drink, and initial tests are revealing that, GAC systems are standard technology. They're used for cleanups. That's how you clean up dry cleaning solvent. That's how you clean up PFAS. That's how you clean up Dieldrin. So they're very effective, and it's used in the United States. And when the filters are all filled up, you ship them off to the United States, and it's disposed of at a lab, a site approved by US EPA, right? Our lab results are sent to the United States by a lab approved by US EPA. So all the players are working together to ensure to the greatest degree possible that the water is safe to drink, right? But in 2012, US EPA said, we're noticing Dieldrin in your reports, but they did not order us to take any action. There was no standard to say it's too much Dieldrin or it's too little Dieldrin. I mean, as I just said, the Navy's got Dieldrin in their water, but it's below a standard. Now, is that the right standard? Should they just shut off the water? I mean, that's the challenge of the science and the art of governance, because you also have to make sure that there's water for people, right? And yet you want to make sure it's safe to drink. The problem is in 2012, when it first came to light, US EPA pointed it out, did not order anything. And it wasn't really till 2016 when, between GWA and GEPA, and Miguel Bordallo joined us, that we all started to take it more seriously, that, hey, we better look at this, even in the absence of a national standard. Let's create a local standard. You gave us permission to do that. GEPA did the process. They can explain why, they did some science. They had to bring in not a radiologist. They had to bring in someone that is an expert in toxicologist, and they can talk about how long it took them to establish the standard that we now follow for Guam. But it's a Guam standard. It's not a national standard. And there's only 6 states and now 1 territory that have a standard for Dieldrin in the water.
Well, let me ask this. Is there anything else that's being detected in our water that it's similar to what we're going through right now, that maybe down the line here we're going to be coming back and doing the same thing, that there's no advisory on it yet at this point?
Well, I mean, I think you're pointing it out exactly. There may be, but we don't know what we don't know. But PFAS is an excellent example, right? We didn't know that the forever chemical was bad. It was being used everywhere. That's why it's called the forever chemical. But now it was finally determined to do something about it. And the United States, every water system in the United States, including us, is going to do something about it. And PFAS is going to cost us $200 million to treat, right? But we didn't know about PFAS till we knew about PFAS, and now we're remediating it. The same thing with Dieldrin. Once we could figure out that, hey, not only was it in the water, but it's at a level that we should be concerned about, then we started to act. But GEPA can talk about how long it took them to establish the standard, and there's a process because, as Tom has alluded to, there's lots of things in water. Water comes from, it falls to the ground, it comes from rivers, it comes from things going through natural resources. And that's why when you bring it out of rivers, or when you bring it out of aquifers, the first thing you do is chlorinate it. That's required by every water system. And now water systems are learning you better put in some other treatments for emerging contaminants that weren't a contaminant back then, but now has emerged at the US EPA level as something we now have to treat. We weren't treating PFAS 20 years ago. Now we're going to have to spend $200 million to treat it now. So a lot of this is you don't know till you know. And no one was trying to hide information. We were providing the information that Dieldrin was present in the water. In fact, it's ironic to me that we sued for PFAS. Why didn't we sue for Dieldrin? It was in the reports. But for whatever reason, the Attorney General's office chose to pick PFAS to go after it because the rest of the country was going after it. The rest of the country's not going after Dieldrin because there's not even a national standard. I mean, I think they should worry about it. And we talk about something's going on in northwestern Guam. The Navy, Camp Blas has it. It's up in the Gigo wells, or 1 Gigo well, and it has a half-life of about 40 years. So if it was banned in the 80s, 40 years later, it's still in our soil. So the half-life of it should have had it deteriorate. So that tells me there was a heck of a lot of Dieldrin used in the 80s or the 90s, right? And now something has disturbed the geology, the topography in a way that now it's showing up in our aquifer, right? It's showing up in the Navy's water, it's showing up in our water. And now we're using a standard that was created by by GEPA, not US EPA, by GEPA, to say above this level, you got to do something with that well, shut it off or treat it. And that's what we're doing now.
You're saying it's showing up in our water. Are you saying it's showing up in our water just in northern Guam, or are we looking as well that we might have some detections in other wells in Guam?
From what I've seen, I think there's actually been some minute presence in other wells as well. But it's below this
acceptable
supposed magic level that says, that you don't have to treat it, right? So I think, part of the challenge for all of us is recognizing, water is not pure and clean when it's drawn up from the aquifer or taken from Ugam River. You got to treat it. And the first thing you do is you chlorinate it, right? That's a federal law. That is a local law. And so we chlorinate it, right? Now we're realizing, hey, there's emerging contaminants. The first one that was tackled is PFAS. Everybody's going after PFAS. Now Dieldrin's reared its ugly head, right? It's one more thing we're going to have to deal with. The positive part, at least in my opinion, is that we know the GAC systems work. That's the standard technology. And we're already seeing test results from the GAC system put on Y-15 that is showing non-detect, which has got to be everybody's goal, non-detect, right? And so that's what we're seeing. So far, it's proving out that the approach to mitigate and remediate what we're seeing in these wells that are above a limit that we created is successful, and I believe it's going to be successful because that's the standard technology US EPA requires. Use granulated activated carbon, and you run the water through that after it's already chlorinated. You run the water through that, and if it comes out on the other side clean, then US EPA, Guam EPA, and GWA says that water is safe to drink because it's been cleaned, right? And that's the process we're going through now.
Back in 2023, GWA was planning on the treatment, but the bid didn't go out to 2025. Why was that that gap in the
Sure.
putting the bid out?
Yeah, we can bring our engineering team on the procurement.
On the specific question with the bid, we do have the Assistant General Manager of Engineering, and he can respond to that, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, Senators.
Identify yourself.
My name is Brett Raley. I'm the Assistant General Manager of Engineering at GWA. The question was, why was there a delay between 2023
from
and
the
2025?
planning stage of treatment until the bid going out in 2020. That was 23 and then till 2025.
So there was a design process that was followed. Once we got our design consultant on board, we took water samples from the well, Y15, because it was the highest of the 3 wells we were considering treatment for. We had that water sent off island to a lab, and they did some column testing to verify the specific specification of GAC. GAC is a material that's made from several different source materials. You can make it from anthracite coal, you can make it from coconut shell. So we did that laboratory testing to confirm the specific type of GAC that would be most appropriate for the treatment. And we were also waiting on the regulations from GEPA, because depending on where they had set the limit would also affect the design of the system. So sizing of the vessels, how frequently you have to change the material out is all a consideration for both the level of contamination and the treatment level you're trying to get to. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the design was not finalized until the interim action level limits were prepared to be established by GEPA.
Your interim treatment system at well Y15, right, is showing no Dieldrin detected, right? What is the status on wells D17 and M4?
The design work that we did, we had GAC systems at 2 other wells that were not in use because those wells had previously had contamination, different chemicals that were no longer being detected in those wells. And the plan was to relocate those vessels, the vessels from well A8 to well M4 and the vessels from F8 to well D17. Mm-hmm. And because of the production capacity at well Y15, we had intended on putting larger vessels in place at that well. As a part of this interim solution, we relocated the smaller vessels from F8 to Y15, and we're currently operating those vessels. Typically in a GAC treatment installation, you run the vessels in a lead and lag configuration so that you have 2 vessels in series to provide the treatment. And what that allows you to do is monitor between the vessels and know when the media has been saturated or expended in the first vessel, and you know it's time to change the media. And so the vessels that we had on island were not large enough for the permanent solution at Y15. The vessels that have been relocated, we are running in a parallel configuration due to the production capacity at the well. And so that's why we're continuing to move forward with a permanent solution that will have larger vessels in a proper lead lag configuration at that site.
You know, when I was briefed about the filtration system, well, first of all, what is the life of the filtration system? How long till you have to change out that filtration system again? And what is the life of that? And when I was briefed about the filtration system, that you cannot just dispose of the filter. It has to be dried up and then move off island as hazardous material. So that's another another hurdle that has to be done. So what is the life of that filtration system that's in there, especially interim, or even at this point, the ones that would be installed in the homes, the interim solution, I guess, the homes. Is it safe for residents to install it themselves? And if they purchase it themselves and install it themselves and they change it out, again, as I was briefed, these are hazardous materials. They cannot just be disposed of in your GWA waste. They have to be dried and removed as hazardous materials. So what are we doing, in regards to that? And what is the life of the interim, of GWA's interim, and the ones in the homes? The
capacity of the system is based on the level of contamination that's being treated and the volume of GAC media that's in the vessel. So the GAC media works by having the contaminants stick to the carbon media that is the GAC that is in the filter. And so over time, the media will saturate and won't be able to absorb any more of the contaminant, and that's the run life of the filter. So the time that the media in the filter will last depends on the level of contamination that's being treated and the volume of media in the vessel. That's one of the reasons why we want larger vessels at Y15, so that we don't have to change the media on a too frequent basis. The evaluation that was looked at for these POE systems that we're considering installing, they appear to, we believe they're going to last more than a year before the carbon filter would need to be changed, but we have stated that the public, if they install these systems, they need to follow the manufacturer's recommendations.
The water that they'll be receiving, though, if we've treated it properly, won't have the contaminant. So it's sort of a backup to what we're going to do, right? We're going to treat it so that as it leaves our storage tank through the GACs, it now goes to the distribution system to people's homes, and then at their home, if they want to put in a POE, that's just additional filtering. But we won't. The real goal is we're not going to want to send any water with Dieldrin or any other contaminant above whatever the levels may be for those contaminants downstream to our ratepayers. And that's why we focus at the storage tanks. That's the pictures you see. Those GACs are put at where we store the water, and then the outlet for the big tanks you see, that outlet is where the water flows to our consumers, and you put the GAC there in between the storage tank that's already got chlorination in it. Then it goes through the GAC, then it heads to Simon's house. And then if Simon puts a POE in addition to that, that's further protection as long as they install it properly and follow the recommendations.
What are we doing then to inform the residents that are affected in these areas for the temporary installations of their home units, I guess, what it's called, and the removal of that, and how to dispose of those filtration systems, because that would be hazardous, wouldn't it not be?
Maybe not.
Maybe not?
I mean, if we've already cleaned it, right? And again,
but
I haven't.
In interim, if they're doing it now,
I mean, we're willing to help them do it now, just because if they want to feel safer, right? And okay, do it. But we're cleaning it up at the source. That's the most important solution, is to get it cleaned at the source.
Sure.
If you want to double protect, I have a different filtering system at home. It's not for contaminants, right? So I don't have a POE, but in there, I don't believe it's a hazard. POEs you can buy, right? So I don't believe that the way it works is it creates a hazardous waste at Tan Maria's house, and she's got to call GEPA and then ship it off to California. I don't think that's how the POEs work.
And to be clear again, Dieldrin is not something that you can boil away, right?
Nope. Neither is PFAS.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Okay. Vice Speaker, sorry.
Mr. Chair, can I
Oh,
just...
yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Theresa Rojas, Counsel to the Guam Waterworks Authority. I just want to circle back to your very first question regarding what is perceived as a gap, I guess, between 2012 and 2023. In 2012, for the record, there was an investigative enforcement inspection performed by US EPA. When US EPA came, they did cite significant deficiencies. There was no significant deficiency cited for Dieldrin. And I just wanted to correct that on the record because I think that's been said publicly, but that's a misstatement. So in 2012, and we can provide this letter to the body, what was done is there was an invitation to further assess any health concerns. So at that point, again, there was no study. I also want to put on the record that in 2003, US EPA did perform its own detailed and fully comprehensive study on Dieldrin to determine whether or not it was a candidate for to set any action level. And they performed a full assessment, and their conclusions were in 2003 that it wasn't an eligible candidate. And so we have that report, and so it was not a candidate. And so Yeah, and in their 2003 report, where they really did a thorough investigation on whether Dieldrin and Aldrin would be a candidate, they concluded that although Dieldrin and Aldrin have adverse health effects in humans, the frequencies and concentrations significant for public health concern is low, and that is a US EPA conclusion. They further concluded that occurrence of Aldrin and Dieldrin in drinking water supplies in the coming years is likely to decrease, and that is a US EPA report and conclusion in 2003. So fast forward to 2012, and you still see it in the water system. There's an invitation to further assess. And then they come back in 2022, and they still see it there. And then there's further studies performed by Guam EPA then. So I just wanted to clarify that, and I find this forum helpful, and it's also GWA's ability to correct any mischaracterizations and misinformation on the record or that's in the community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and that's what we want to do. We want to get the proper information, the right information out, and spare any information that's going out there that is untrue. So with that, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. Mr. Chair, perhaps I think what it comes down to is the levels of Dieldrin in the water from 2012 to today. You guys have been seeing an increase in the production wells, correct? Okay. So when EPA and Waterworks collaborated together to work on coming up with how
I'm not sure if it's an increase. I don't know what they saw in 2012, but the presence, right? The presence of water. I don't know whether it's increased or decreased, but
okay.
But it's now the Navy's seeing it. We're seeing it again. So from that point of view, yeah, there were traces of it. Now whether the traces have increased, they now have reached a level now that we've set that says we need to now specifically worry about it. But how much it increased or whether it increased, its presence is concerning to all of us now.
Okay.
We have a standard. Now we got to clean it up.
Now that's great. We know the presence now. Do we know the source?
Good question.
Do we know where the source of Dieldrin is coming from? I mean, we can all talk about the treatments and everything, but if we don't know what the source is or where it's coming from.
I know from our point of view, first let's clean the water.
Right.
Going forward. Then we'll do the detective work going backwards, right? But as Commissioner Duenas, not Joey, but our new Commissioner Duenas talked, he's a farmer. And he was at just Tuesday's meeting. We were stirring that stuff around and not wearing gloves. So it was in use. Clearly it was in use in the 70s and the 80s before it was banned. It was used primarily for agriculture and for termiticide, when you're building a building and you want to kill termites, right? And back then it was okay, right? Now, 40 years later, it ain't okay, right?
Right.
But the fact that its traces are still in the water, traces have been in the water for a long time below our level. It's even in the Navy's water below this level. But it seems to be more prominent in its reappearance, if I can characterize it that way, in that northwestern corner. And the Navy story said it was in Camp Blas. That was newly constructed, right? The good Lord knows what happened up there, and we'll do as much detective work as we can do, but whether we're gonna, we need to find that source if we can. But it could be very spread out, and it could be trickling from where it was put in to now it's getting into the aquifer. And there's people much smarter than me that can try to figure out the detective work. But I noticed with PFAS, we stopped worrying, we went after the who made it versus it's still in the water. We haven't really answered the question, the source of PFAS, mainly because we're finding out, unlike Dieldrin, it seems to be everywhere, right? So, that's the challenge of the work we're all trying to do.
Okay. Ms. Lastimoza, the Dieldrin, has EPA at least kind of like whittled down where the source, so obviously Y15 is a concerned well, right? Is there any construction or farming that's going on close to that water well? Any concerns within that area that should draw the attention as to why there's elevated levels or levels of concern of Dieldrin in that particular well?
So thank you, Vice Speaker. We do have our theories and our suspicions, and we are working with US EPA to either find the funding or the technical assistance to do that investigation. And certainly we don't want to be liable for accusing any particular organization of, being the cause of this contamination until we've actually completed that investigation. So I'd rather not speak on that yet until we can actually start that investigation with US EPA. We've already started those discussions. Actually, US EPA CERCLA Superfund personnel are here conducting inspections, and we've actually had that discussion and kind of raised our concerns and theories about where the contamination may have originated. But like Mr. Sanchez said, Dieldrin was used in agricultural applications as well as construction of homes and buildings as a termaticide in the foundation of these buildings. So I can say that, with recent demolition of those buildings that stir up that Dieldrin that was previously contained in that foundation, we suspect that, construction debris from basically demolishing those buildings and where those C&D material went may be a source of that contamination.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm glad to hear that, you guys are already taking that approach and getting with US EPA and trying that technical assistance grant to find the source. And I agree with you that the pesticide contaminated soil, right, from these demolition of buildings and things like that, perhaps had a play in it. And, there's so much construction going up in the north. So perhaps what's your investigation will conclude, we'll wait for you to work with US EPA on that. And
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that. With Waterworks, I saw in your slide presentation that in October 2025, GWA launched the point of entry filter installation or reimbursement of approved filter systems purchased by customers. So is there a particular vendor or particular store that GWA lets them know that, or what kind of filter is required, and what was the specifications? I mean, if GWA had a certain specification that had to be met to on the point of entry by the water well, what was the specifications to the homeowners, and how was that message relayed to them?
I'll have our Assistant General Manager on Administration.
Good morning, Senators, Vice Speaker. My name is Chris Budassi. I'm the Assistant General Manager of Administration at Guam Waterworks Authority and have oversight on general procurement, not the CIP procurement, but so the process right now with the point of entry systems, it's an active procurement, so I can't divulge too much information. As far as the specifications for the filtration systems, those specifications were given to us by Guam EPA, so it's their responsibility to, whether it's the GAC vessel specification requirements or for the filtration system requirements, they provide that to us to meet the levels of filtration.
And how was that information passed out to the customers of GWA? And what was the, how many customers have purchased on their own and was reimbursed by GWA, and how many did GWA install?
Okay, so right now we haven't installed any systems. Like I said, the procurement is still active, and so we've yet to select the vendors and award the contracts to bring the systems in and install them. So it's a pretty elaborate process because the vendors that sell the systems don't necessarily have the capacity to install them, and so we're having to find contractors to work with the vendors that sell the systems. And so the procurement's been a little bit more complex than just awarding the contract and having them install it. As far as how we're reaching out to customers, we're actively calling them to tell them about the program, directing them to how to apply for it. At this time, I believe we have a little bit over 80 customers that have registered to have systems installed. As far as reimbursements go, I think we've had 8 people request for reimbursement, some for point of use systems, which would be your basic under the sink filtration system, and then a couple for the point of entry systems.
Okay, thank you. The notice from EPA on the do not drink, how much longer would that continue to go on with GWA after I guess the findings of what the system is doing currently, and the levels are I guess decreasing, right? Or they're coming into acceptable standards with EPA. When will a notice be put out to the public about the do not drink advisory?
So GWA submitted a mitigation plan that included monitoring to go from weekly to monthly. But the way that the IAL works is that you take 4 quarters to come up with an annual average to determine compliance with the interim action level, right, which is at that 0.2 ppb or the 0.5 ppb. So this is kind of outside of what we anticipated for the IAL. So we are in consultation with all the water directors. Actually, one of our staff is at a water directors meeting this past week to kind of talk about how do we then lift the advisory when it doesn't, there isn't a specific requirement on how to do that in the current IAL. Certainly, we take notice that there is non-detect in the 2 samples that have already been taken. But again, those 2 GAC systems are just leads, right? There's no lag results. So whether or not there's going to be breakthrough in that system and when that's going to happen, usually it's those 4 quarters that will determine compliance with the interim action level. So again, we're kind of hashing it out with US EPA and all the water directors in the region to say, okay, well, how can we achieve lifting this advisory with the data that's being provided by the utility? Is the weekly and the monthly, is it, do we stick with the 4 quarters and then determine at the end of the year, in 12 months, whether or not there's compliance and then lift it. But at the same time, knowing that, we can assure, or GWA can assure that there's still non-detects in that weekly and monthly testing, but not lift it because it doesn't conform to the IAL. So that's something that we're still trying to figure out.
So is there any standard within the U.S. that as what are acceptable levels, and has anyone else gone through this issue with Dieldrin?
Yeah, so when we were working with US EPA and other states that had Dieldrin issues, there were 4 other states, including Hawaii. When we spoke with a senior toxicologist at the time, we kind of mirrored what Hawaii was doing, only because it was similar infrastructure, it was similar environmental conditions that kind of gave us a little bit of relativity to what Hawaii was doing. So that was kind of the standard we set our IAL with, was the state of Hawaii. But there were 4 other states, I believe, that had Dieldrin issues that set their own either interim action level or maximum contaminant level for Dieldrin.
Okay, thank you. With GWA, are you guys still providing the tanker water trucks, and also who's providing bottled water for the residents? Is GWA providing that as well?
Yes, the tanker water, as well as, we actually call them fill stations. These are locations that are tapped into our distribution system that's not served by Y15, right? So there's locations where there's a tanker, and there's locations where there's essentially like a fill station. So yes, we will continue to provide that service, as well as the bottled water.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to add, at least at the briefing we got Tuesday, on our side, we're testing it weekly, right? We want to see 4 consecutive weeks of non-detect, and then we're going to work with GEPA, because it's really their final call about when do they feel comfortable enough to raise it. So as they pointed out, every source of water is tested on a regular basis for everything, right? But generally speaking, we got like 100 wells more or less, right? You can't do all 100 of them every month, right? So you rotate it. That's where the quarterly part kind of comes in. At least once a year, every well will get looked at, right? But for now, internally, what was revealed to us at Tuesday's meeting was, so far it's non-detect. We're going to test every week and keep testing. We haven't turned that well back on, but we're going to keep seeing that it remains non-detect. Then we pass it over to our GEPA colleagues and say, when are you comfortable?
Thank you. Well, hopefully that technical assistance grant goes through, and you'll be able to find out the source of the contaminant, and whether it's inside the fence or outside the fence. We just got to hold those accountable, responsible for this action. But thank you, Mr. Chair, on that. Well,
you may never find that, okay, Simon Sanchez in 1987, he did it, right?
Perhaps maybe not Simon Sanchez, but at least a general area of where it's at, whether it's construction,
right, so
whether it's farming,
right.
we go and, check that area, and
that's going to be a challenge.
Whatever contaminated soil or things like that is with Dieldrin in it, then at least we can have it removed or mitigated, whatever it may be.
Well, and I think what you find out that best practices is you remove it at the water side. If it's in there, and maybe you don't find the source, but you tackle it as it enters your system, right? Because that's really, at the end of the day, all we can control. We can't control why the geology of Guam and the history of Guam has all of a sudden created a problem in one well where it's now above a level that didn't exist 20 years ago that we had to create, right? And so at the end of the day, the best practices is you may never find, kind of like PFAS, it's everywhere. So you just treat it, right? You treat it where the level is high. The $200 million we're going to spend on PFAS is to consolidate water sources that the PFAS is in, and then we run it to one big filtering system. Then we send it out to our people. That's the same logic at a mini level of how you deal with Dieldrin at one well. You treat it as it leaves your system. You treat it before you send it out to your customers.
Okay. Thank you for that. Sir?
Chairman, so it's sort of, I like to defer to Brett it was, you had a question earlier about the GAC
Yes.
effectivity. So I want to tie it, I mean, we have an interim that's there, and in conjunction, we're actually working continuously for the permanent. And so I'd like for Brett to tie it all together for you.
So the interim system that we've installed is about half the size of the GAC that we plan on putting at the site. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we're running both vessels in parallel rather than in series. And so we're going to come back and put twice as much GAC in a lead lag configuration for the final solution. But based on the lab testing that was done and the sizing of the permanent system that we intend to place there, we expect even the GAC in this temporary system to last between a year and 18 months before seeing breakthrough, which is enough time for us to get the permanent system in place.
When is that?
So the contractual timeline is summer 2026 to get that installed. We have been in conversations with the contractor and some of the stateside suppliers. Some of the issues involved in the longer timeline for the vessels is the seismic requirements for Guam. The vessels are being sourced out of a factory in New Mexico, I believe, and we're talking with the fabricator about doing some of the seismic retrofit on Guam so we can produce the vessels more quickly and get them shipped to Guam. And we're seeing if there's a way to get the vessels here sooner than the timeline that was provided for in the contract.
And Brett, how much is the permanent solution?
I'm not going to get the number correct for memory, but it's, I believe, the contract value, including the design and CM work, is somewhere around $7.4 million, I believe.
$7 million.
Just for one well,
Just
for
for
Y15.
that, just for Y15.
I'm sorry, for the three wells that we're adding treatment for, Y15, D17, and M4.
Yeah, we're building a permanent structure, bigger GACs.
The question came up earlier about Dieldrin in general. There are 124 different locations around the island that are considered entry points to the distribution system. We have 120 wells, Ugum, the Santa Rita Spring, the Tumon Maui well, the Guam International Airport system. So there are 124 sites that we routinely test as entry points to the distribution system. Of those 124 sites, 31 or 2 of them are non-detect for Dieldrin. 83 or 4 of them have had some level of Dieldrin detection under half of the IAL, under 0.1 parts per billion. So island-wide, you can say that Dieldrin is widespread, but at a low level. There are only 9 wells where the detection level of Dieldrin is above 50% of the IAL. And of those wells, there are only 2 wells at present that are over the IAL. That's D17, which is turned off, and Y15.
Thank you.
Yeah. So,
Chair?
Just my last.
Okay.
Administrator Lastimoza, is there any, he was mentioning about steel detections and things like that. Is there any set guidelines as to if there's a detected contaminant? Is there any guidelines for testing or things like that EPA has issued, or, for perhaps like the general public? I mean, if they wanted to test their soil, is there some type of guidelines out there?
I guess it would depend on what contaminant that you're looking to test.
Yeah.
For Dieldrin, I think that, there's definitely a method to collect the sample, store the sample, send the sample within a given time frame to a US EPA approved lab. And that's certainly the lab that we are hoping to build in the future, is that sort of lab to be able to test for organics, volatile organics, heavy metals, all the emerging contaminants that are emerging.
Yeah.
But that's certainly what we are hoping to do in the future here on Guam. But currently, we would have to send it off island.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Chair, my time is up. I'll go ahead and...
Thank you. Before we move on, Chair Bree, since we're asking questions with both GWA and also EPA, why don't we go ahead and finish the presentations by also EPA and then Public Health, and then we'll go back to Senator Bree. Okay? So go ahead, EPA.
If we can have our slides put up. So our presentation is going to center around the chronology of the development of the interim action level. Next slide. So just to define what an interim action level is, it's a temporary guideline for a contaminant in either a public water system or food until a permanent maximum contaminant level can be established. So I want to emphasize that this interim action level is temporary. We will eventually have to determine a maximum contaminant level for Dieldrin. So when the IAL was established, it triggered immediate short-term actions to protect public health and the environment by requiring monitoring, which we've done, or initiating mitigation measures while a permanent solution is being developed, and that's already ongoing. To establish the IAL for Dieldrin, Guam EPA first informed its board of directors of the detection of Dieldrin in the public water system, and then we worked with Region 9 partners to establish the IAL. Then we sought public comment, and then we received final approval from the board. Next slide. So this is a timeline from when those of us at the helm were notified of Dieldrin in the drinking water. I want to kind of go back and say that, while there was a notification to GWA and Guam EPA in 2012, really the people that were at Guam EPA in 2022, 2023 were not around when that 2012 report came out. So from 2023, when we were notified, those of us at Guam EPA and at the helm actually started to develop this IAL and mitigation measures moving forward to present. So I'll go over the timeline in a little bit, but this is the timeline from March of 2023 to August of 2025. Next slide. So the concern with developing the IAL for Dieldrin was determining what was the cancer risk for Dieldrin. So US EPA places chemicals into one of 5 categories, A through E. And Dieldrin is in group B2. So if you look at the table, B2 says it indicates that there's sufficient evidence in animals, that there's a cancer risk in animals, but there's inadequate or no evidence of cancer or cancer risk in humans. Next slide. So when we worked with US EPA and the drinking water standards, it provided guidance on how much of a contaminant is considered safe in drinking water. And they gave us 2 numbers. So the cancer limit, right, which is not the most conservative, but it's at that acceptable level of risk or probability of increasing the risk of cancer, and that's a 1 in 10,000 increased risk factor. And so when we look at US EPA basis for these limits, we look at short term, which is 1 to 10 days, using the most vulnerable, which is a 22-pound child drinking 1 liter of water per day to actually see those non-cancer adverse acute symptoms, liver, neurological issues. But when we looked at the cancer risk, we look at the lifetime safety issue. Using a 154-pound adult, drinking 2 liters of water at that contaminant level of that 0.2, which is the 1 in 10,000 risk factor. Next slide, please. So really, the risk factor that US EPA uses is the 1 in 1 million increased risk factor to the baseline to 1 in 10,000. So that is like kind of the safe zone for when they look at the increased risk of cancer. So this term of 1 to the -4 or 1 in 10,000 cancer risk refers to, again, that 1 in 10,000 lifetime risk of developing cancer from a specific exposure to a carcinogen. And again, Dieldrin is a probable carcinogen, not a known carcinogen. So in the environmental risk assessment, this level is generally considered the upper end of the acceptable risk range and indicates that action may be warranted. So we created that IAL, we determined that action is warranted when it reached that 0.2 parts per billion level. So when that risk level is exceeding that 1 in 10,000 risk, that's when we started to require GWA and any other public water system that exceeded that level of a cleanup or mitigation action, which they're already doing. Next slide, please. So here's the timeline in the most condensed version, but we'll go over it in a more detailed timeline. Next slide, please. So in March 2023, that's when these NEIC, which is the National Enforcement Investigation Center, investigators came out to Guam to look at public water systems and start, collecting data. They started collecting water samples and testing them. So these set of inspectors, believe it or not, the one inspector that came out actually came out in 2012 and said that, hey, did you know that there was Dieldrin in the water as far back as when I was here 11 years ago? And so again, those of us at the office were like, no, we didn't know. So, what is Dieldrin? We started looking at what Dieldrin was and what the, what the harm and risk to have Dieldrin in our water. So once we were informed, we started talking about, this emerging contaminants grant that we were applying for, but mainly under PFAS. So really, that was kind of the starting point. Was we were looking at PFAS. March 2023 came around. They told us, oh, there's also Dieldrin. And then we found out that, the treatment for PFAS was also the same for Dieldrin. So knowing that we didn't have a regulatory level for enforcement, we started to develop this IAL. We started working with US EPA, setting up meetings, having these phone calls, and then MAWAR hit, right? So really, Guam EPA kind of put Dieldrin and the IAL on the back burner. So from May 2023 to about September of 2023, we were looking at, we were in recovery mode, right? Most people didn't have water. There were actually water vending machines that were shut down because it was more bacterial contamination that people were concerned about than it was Dieldrin. But we also found out through that whole process that these water vending machines with their filtration systems and reverse osmosis, that it also treated PFAS and Dieldrin. So it was kind of a win-win at that point. So, when we kind of stabilized in our roles in the recovery of Typhoon Mawar, then we got back to working on the IAL. So December of 2023 is when we first informed our board of directors that there was this report by the NEIC investigators and that there was this concern that Dieldrin was a concern in our drinking water. So we told them that we were going to establish this interim action level, and then we started to set up public comment and public information. So we did at the time inform our environmental chairperson, and we actually set up the first oversight hearing here at the Guam Legislature in January of 2024. Next slide, I'm sorry. So in January 2024, right after the holidays, we had our first legislative oversight hearing with the 37th Guam Legislature with Senator Perez as our oversight chair at the time of this Dieldrin contamination. We did identify the three, at the time, the three wells that were, had the highest readings, but we also did talk about how 66% of GWA wells were, had some level, even though it was way below the action level, that had traces of Dieldrin in the water. And then we talked about how what we were proposing as this interim action level, again, that 0.002 to 0.2 parts per billion, which is that 1 in 1 million risk, to the 1 in 10,000 increased risk. We did also at the time say that GWA was deploying treatment to units at D17, M4, and Y15, but that it would take up to a year to deploy. So, even as far back as a year and 10 months ago, we did talk about what we were doing and the course of action that we were pursuing, and that GWA was aware and that they were working on mitigation efforts to these high levels of Dieldrin in their wells. Then in April of 2024, we again provided another informational hearing to the 37th Guam Legislature and to the board, providing updates of where we were at the time developing this IAL. At the time as well, we were working with the senior toxicologist at US EPA and his availability to come out to Guam to address concerns from the public. So we were finally able to lock down a schedule for him to come out, which was June of 2024, where we also held a public hearing for Dieldrin and to include public comment to the proposed interim action level. So that was held June 24th. And then that also opened up a 45-day public comment period for people to submit concerns to Guam EPA regarding the proposed IAL. And then that 45-day public comment period, next slide, please. That 45-day public comment period ended in August 14th of 2024. And then we did receive comments from GWA, Senator Perez, former Senator Hope Cristobal, and the organization formerly known as Proteji Litexen. And so in the next couple of months, September to October, we looked at those comments. We either incorporated revisions to the IAL, but we did discuss those comments before we finalized the draft IAL. And then in November of 2024, we presented the approved draft of the IAL to our board of directors, which they then approved at the board of directors meeting November 24, 2024. And then as with any regulation, there is always a compliance date. So we worked with the utilities, all the public water systems, and we came up with this August 1st, 2025 implementation date, which required all the PWSs to come into compliance. With regard to the implementation date with all the other public water systems, which again are given a year basically to come up with the 4 quarters, to come up with the running annual average, GWA was different because GWA had already started to collect that data for years. They were treated differently because we already had the information from their own data that required them to start the mitigation efforts already. So while every other PWS will see what their running annual averages next year, GWA was required to do mitigation immediately. Next slide, please. So why was the public informed in 2025? So again, as a regulatory agency, Guam EPA can't legally enforce the IEL until it actually becomes implemented. And that requires going through the process of going through our board, getting it approved, working to make sure that the IEL is truly science-based. And to be quite honest, it took 11 months. It took 11 months from the time that we introduced it to our board in December of 2023 to November of 2024. Guam EPA developed this IEL in 11 months with an implementation date of 2025. And by GWA's own statements, because they already knew that we were developing this IEL, they already started to prepare for mitigation for their impacted wells. So we've had this cooperative working relationship where we kind of kept them abreast of all of the things we were doing, all of the discussions we were having with US EPA and how it would impact their operations. So I just want to mention that we have been working cooperatively since we were notified in March of 2023. Next slide, please. So what has been done? So we know that as of September 12th, GWA issued these Tier 1 advisory notifications to these affected ratepayers in GIGO because of the IEL being effective as of August 1st, 2025. So these notifications were sent as compliance requirements with the IEL, and these notifications were mailed out to approximately 1,112 ratepayers. Next slide, please. And then at the request of the GIGO mayor, she asked us to hold a town hall meeting to address concerns from the GIGO residents. So GWA, Guam EPA, Public Health, along with the Department of Agriculture, held this town hall meeting on Thursday, September 18th at the GIGO Gymnasium. And then in response to the growing concern, then Acting Governor Tenorio declared a state of emergency over Dieldrin contamination. And then it allocated $250,000 to GWA to procure these point of entry filters and other supplies for these affected households. And then concurrently, the acting governor also wrote this letter to US EPA's acting regional administrator asking for assistance. And so through that support letter, US EPA and Guam EPA started having weekly meetings, if not sometimes twice a week meetings to discuss either funding the treatment systems for these point of entry, point of use systems for these affected households, but also to provide technical support and compliance and guidance on this lifting the do not drink without treatment advisory. So again, we actually just had a meeting yesterday to talk about GWA's mitigation efforts and their sampling plan of going from weekly to monthly, and at what point does Guam EPA feel comfortable or US EPA feel comfortable in lifting that do not drink advisory. Next slide, please. And so through those meetings, US EPA committed to funding both the short-term fixes, like the point of use devices, but also the long-term solutions such as the granulated activated carbon systems for that well remediation. So the whole house POE systems, what we were told was estimated at about $2,700 per unit, but that's not including installation. And I know that GWA had plans of performing pre-piping so that when these units did become available, they would be able to connect quicker. So I don't know whether or not that's still an option, considering that the 2 GAC systems in place show that there's non-detective Dieldrin. Also, GWA proposed an operational adjustment that would have taken 300 affected customers off of the Y15 distribution well. So that we approved that. So I believe that they have diverted Y15 water to those 300 customers. So I believe 300 customers have been removed from the 1,112 affected customers. Is that correct? Yeah. So as of today, those 2 interim GAC vessels have been installed at Y15, and the initial test results indicate that Dieldrin is undetectable in the treated water. And then subject to your questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Let's go with public health.
We had prepared some slides as well. Hafde and good morning, Chairperson Senator Lujan, Speaker Blas and Vice Speaker Ada, and members of the Guam 38th Legislature. Again, my name is Patrick Soto. I'm the Territorial Epidemiologist with the Guam Department of Public Health and Social Services. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to present the Department's preliminary epidemiologic assessment in response to the detection of elevated Dieldrin levels in Jigo Water Well Y15. Next slide, please. As we should all know by now, Dieldrin is a type of organochlorine designed to control a variety of insects or pests, primarily termites. Although banned in the 1980s, Dieldrin is considered a persistent organic pollutant due to its resistance to degradation and ability to remain in the environment for a long period. Because Dieldrin has a low solubility, it does not readily dissolve in water. Thus, ingestion of drinking water or food items containing Dieldrin is the most likely route of exposure for the general population. Most of our understanding about the health impacts of Dieldrin come from animal studies. There's limited human data that come from occupationally exposed cohorts, self-reported surveys, serum surveys, and case reports. What we do know is that central nervous system excitation culminating in convulsions was the principal adverse effect noted, but were primarily found in occupational studies of workers employed either in the application or the manufacturing of Dieldrin. In other words, you need to be exposed at extremely high concentrations of Dieldrin before symptoms of seizures, convulsions, headaches, or dizziness manifest. In Guam, we detected 3 cases of toxic effect due to pesticide poisoning, but all 3 were not related to Dieldrin, so none of them were related to Dieldrin. One was exposed to pesticide being sprayed outdoors in 2022, but because Dieldrin was banned, it was presumed that this did not contain Dieldrin. One was thought to be pesticide related, but was identified as an infant who had just ingested nicotine gum. And then the last one had prolonged exposure to a bug bomb discharged indoors. Next slide. What we also know is that Dieldrin was classified as a Group 2B carcinogen by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The excerpt on the top right corner of this slide was taken directly from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or ATSDR, the lead federal public health agency for determining, preventing, and mitigating the human health effects of exposure to hazardous substances. It states the HHS has not evaluated the carcinogenicity of Dieldrin. US EPA classified Dieldrin as a Group 2B probable human carcinogen based on sufficient evidence of carcinogenicity in mice. Next. US EPA considered the human carcinogenicity data for Dieldrin to be inadequate. And to iterate what's on the screen, according to the US EPA's hazard identification for carcinogenic effects, a group 2B carcinogen is defined as having sufficient evidence from animal bioassay data with little or no human data. Next slide, please. This is not a question of carcinogenicity. This is an acknowledgement that we are limited in our understanding. Well-conducted epidemiological studies in human populations offer more accurate and higher quality insights into the associations between a hazard and a health outcome. Major limitations common to the available epidemiologic studies for Dieldrin are the lack of quantitative measures, presence of confounding factors, or small numbers of cases reported. Next slide, please. These two tables highlight the relevant epi studies that have found an association or no association relative to the cancer type. For both tables, on the left column, you have your cancer type, such as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, female breast cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer. In the middle, you have the study that found an association, and on the right column, you have the studies that found no association. Next slide, please. Table 2-3 on the left identifies self-reported use pesticide survey studies. For non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, there were 6 available studies, one of which found an association among agricultural workers. For female breast cancer, there were 2 studies, one of which found an increased risk in women who had never used pesticides, but interestingly, whose husbands used pesticides. To be clear, they also looked at 50 specific pesticides, so some of the associations may have occurred by chance. Table 2-4 on the right-hand side lists studies that measure Dieldrin levels in blood or adipose tissue. For female breast cancer, there were a total of 8 studies available, half of which found an association or an increased risk. Next slide, please. So now that we have a foundational understanding of the extent of knowledge available regarding the health implications of Dieldrin, the department undertook a preliminary epidemiologic analysis. In our study, we sought to answer the following 2 questions. 1, is there an association between Dieldrin detection in the northern water well and female breast cancer incidence in Guam from 2007 to 2022? That should say 2007 to 2022, apologies. And the second question is GEGO disproportionately impacted due to the elevated levels detected in well Y15? Next slide, please. To answer these questions, we conducted a retrospective review of cancer diagnoses in Guam from 2007 to 2022. Our starting point was 2007 because this was the first water quality report made publicly available by the Guam Waterworks Authority. Our endpoint was 2022 because this is the most complete and recently available data for cancer diagnoses. We briefly looked at overall cancer rates, but focused on female breast cancer diagnoses because this is where the available evidence was strongest. To capture female breast cancer diagnoses by year, we requested data from the Guam Cancer Registry. To measure mortality due to breast cancer, we pulled data from the Office of Vital Statistics and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Center for Health Statistics. GWA's annual Consumer Confidence Report provided us with the range of Dieldrin values detected in samples, but we prioritized the maximum level due to Dieldrin's ability to persist in the environment. Time series analyses were performed to evaluate differences in breast cancer incidence and mortality by year. To assess differences in breast cancer detection amongst villages, we used the standardized incidence ratio, and I'll go over that when we get to that slide. This is a preliminary ecological study, so statistical tests for significance were not performed. Next slide, please. There are several layers to the graph you see here. So focusing on the blue bars first, the light blue bar represents the incidence rate for all female cancer diagnoses in Guam for that respective year. The dark blue bar nestled in the light blue represents the incidence rate for female breast cancer in that year. For both bars, you're looking to the left, looking at the left vertical axis for your measurement, and that's incidence rate per 100,000 population. So incidence rate is defined as the number of new cases of a disease that occurs during a specified time period in a population at risk for developing that disease. It can be calculated as the number of new cases divided by the number of persons at risk for developing that disease. It's often expressed as a rate per 100,000 population, which allows for comparison across jurisdictions, states, villages, or even countries, and is a measure of risk. In this graph for the year 2007, there were a total of 177 cancer diagnoses, but the incidence rate for the female population, and what's reflected on this graph, is 225 diagnoses per 100,000 female population. Likewise, for breast cancer diagnoses, there were a total of 61 diagnoses for 2007, but the incidence rate will tell us there are 77 diagnoses per 100,000 population for that year. Now focusing on the line graph, the lines represent the maximum level of dieldrin detected in Guam water source in orange, FINA water source in green, and in groundwater source in red. Please note that dieldrin was not detected in Guam or FINA, thus their data points remained at 0, and you can't even see the orange line. It's hidden behind the green line. For all lines, you're looking at the right vertical axis for your measurement, and this is measured in parts per billion or micrograms per liter. And the scale was adjusted solely for ease of seeing. Dieldrin was detected, or has been detected and reported since 2007 by GWA, but has only been detected in groundwater sources. In 2007, the level of dieldrin detected was 0.04 parts per billion. We begin to see the rise in dieldrin levels in 2011 and maxing out at 2.0 parts per billion in 2013, 2014, and 2018. And note also, dieldrin levels were not reported in 2020. So now looking at both graphs in unison, the detection rates of dieldrin does appear to coincide with cancer incidence and breast cancer incidence. However, I have to emphasize that because we are looking at group level data and not measuring individual exposures and health outcomes by asking the residents about their history of exposure to other known carcinogens, we cannot conclude with certainty that there is an association between this change in dieldrin detection with a change in cancer diagnoses. This graph perfectly illustrates the concept of confounding the masked presence of an external factor or other factors that influences the observed outcome. Although it looks associated, we know that there are other factors for breast cancer in the background influencing the rates. The changes may also be artificially attributed to progress made in our ability to detect breast cancer much earlier on. Next slide, please. This next figure illustrates the age at diagnosis and the age at death. The plot you see, the box and whisker plot you see, represents the age range for all female breast cancer diagnoses. So the bottom line is your youngest, the top line is your oldest age at diagnosis, and the middle box is your first and third quartile range, with that line in the middle representing your median age. And then the circles are your outliers, but have little influence over these measures. The red line is your median age at death due to breast cancer. For all deaths due to breast cancer in 2007, half of those individuals were no older than 59. Similarly, for all deaths due to breast cancer in 2022, half of those individuals were no older than 64 years. With the exception of 2008, there were no major differences in age at diagnosis or age at death due to breast cancer. Considering the long-term or chronic effects of dieldrin, one would presume that the majority of diagnoses or deaths in recent years would skew towards the younger population. But much like the previous graph that I presented, accurate inferences cannot be made without an understanding of exposure history at the individual level. Next slide, please. The last test we performed is the standardized incidence ratio, or SIR. The SIR is a useful approach to comparing the incidence of cancer in a village compared to what we would expect. It is the ratio of observed cancer cases in the village compared to the number that would be expected if the study village experienced the same cancer rates as the reference population, in this case, Guam as a whole. The SIR was adjusted for age, an important risk factor for many cancers, but in our analysis, we suppressed diagnoses for either confidentiality purposes or to avoid unstable results due to low numbers of cases. Next slide, please. This table represents the SIRs by village for 4 periods of interest: 2007 to 2010, 2011 to 2014, 2015 to 2018, and 2019 to 2022. The dashes represent the suppressed data. I have on the right an example of how to interpret an SIR. So an SIR of 1.0 means there are no differences in diagnosis detected. What we saw for that year is exactly what we would expect. An SIR of 1.5 means there's a 50% increase in breast cancer cases or in cancer cases. So looking at GEGO for 2007 to 2010, we saw about 34% of breast cancer diagnoses compared to what we would expect for that time period. In 2011 to 2014, we saw 41% of what we would expect. And in 2019 to 2022, we saw about half of what we would expect. Looking across the table for all villages in all time periods, we saw less than what we had expected, with the exception of Malesu. There are a number of residents with an unknown village that may explain why across all villages we were seeing a lot less than what we would have expected. Next slide, please. To conclude, what I had just presented was preliminary and subject to what we refer to as the ecological fallacy, the misleading inference that associations at the aggregate or holistic level or group level are true at the individual level. Regardless if an association was detected or not, ecologic studies are subject to confounding the mixing of effects of other risk factors with the exposure of interest. To address the gaps in this early assessment, it would be prudent, and I would fully recommend and support, a full epidemiologic case control study be employed to effectively examine the possible relationship between Dieldrin and breast cancer. And this may also be an opportunity to assess for other environmental hazards as well. And with that, I pass it to our Chief of Environmental Health, Tom Nadeau.
Thank you, Patrick. Next slide, please. So good afternoon, or good morning, pardon me, and half a day. My name is Tom Nadeau. I'm the Chief Environmental Public Health Officer with the Division of Environmental Health, Public Health. Next slide, please. So the Division of Environmental Health, otherwise known as DEH, we're involved with Dieldrin contamination in the drinking water because of our various health regulated establishments that we regulate that may be affected by it. In September 4, 2025, DEH was notified by Guam EPA of the Dieldrin contamination in the Santa Rosa area of GEGO. In the days following the initial notification, DEH and the Division of Public Health and of this department communicated frequently with EPA in preparing the response. DEH did meet with Guam EPA and GWA on September 10 to discuss our requirements of health regulated establishments when it came to drinking water. We explained that these establishments can only use water in their operations if such water has been approved for drinking by Guam EPA. Because Guam EPA had deemed the water in the Santa Rosa area as not approved for consumption, DEH did share with them that the department will then be prohibiting these establishments in that area from using the tap water and thus may need to cease operations. Next slide, please. With the assistance and guidance of Guam EPA, the department prepared a written notice for the regulated establishments in the affected area. The notice explained that 1, establishments preparing food had to cease operations immediately unless using approved alternate water source. For other food establishments that were only selling prepackaged food, they may continue to operate, but they may not use the tap water for washing food contact surfaces such as dishware and utensils. Also, ice and beverages could not be served using tap water. Thus, water vending machines operating in the area also had to cease operations. These notices were personally delivered to the establishments on September 15, 2025. We had identified a school, that's Upi Elementary School, handful of food establishments, and 3 beverage vending machines for a total of 8 establishments operating under 11 sanitary permits, since 3 of them have multiple permits. Next slide, please. Okay. So GWA had installed Guam EPA-approved filtration system in multiple drinking fountains and sinks at Upi Elementary School. Thus, the school was allowed to operate. Because the 3 water vending machines in affected areas had the capability to move Dieldrin through their internal filtration system, Guam EPA did collect water samples from its finished processed water and had them tested. Upon confirmation from Guam EPA and their approval, DEH did authorize those 3 vending machines to reopen on September 30th. So on the screen, this is a table of all the 11 permitted operations of 9 establishments and its current status. You will note that 3 food manufacturers are still closed, and they did so voluntarily as we learned that they decided not to seek the use of alternate water source to operate. All others on the table have resumed operations, and we did visit them after reopening and will continue to conduct follow-up visits to ensure compliance to the notice. Next slide, please. So moving forward, DEH will continue to collaborate with Guam EPA, Guam Waterworks, and our department's own EPI team in response to Dieldrin contamination. As previously mentioned, DEH will continue to conduct inspections of the affected establishments to monitor their operations. Thank you very much.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, my apologies.
Okay.
That concludes my presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I yield to Senator Salas Matanani, I'd like to recognize, of course, Speaker Blas and Senator Barnett. Chairman Salas Matanani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd just like to ask, are there any residents of GEGO that are here? And if you are, could you please raise your hands? Any residents of GEGO? I see the mayor here. Okay. Are you satisfied with the answers and the PowerPoint presentations from today's hearing, from these regulatory agencies? If you are, please raise your hand. Do you feel that you've been properly informed of the contamination since, I guess it was first discovered several years ago? Do you feel that as a resident of GEGO, you've been properly informed? Please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Because I am also a resident of GEGO, and I too don't feel that I've been properly informed or aware of the severity of the contamination in GEGO. And I'm not sure if there are residents from Mangilao or Dedado as well that might feel the same way as residents in GEGO. And from public health, I noticed the presentation that you had, and I had no idea about these different markets because I go to these different markets in GEGO. I go there and I get snacks for my son at some of these markets in GEGO. So I'm even more concerned, now. So as I was researching some of the concerns about Dieldrin, I watched a portion of the November 2023 Guam EPA board meeting when they were discussing and doing this presentation about Dieldrin contamination. And one of the things they discussed was people are going to ask us, what's the source of contamination? And again, that was November of 2023. It's going to be 2 years in about, 30 days. So can you tell us today, 2 years later, what is the source of this contamination? Or is it going to take another 2 years or another year to do this investigation? Can you tell us the findings, anybody from Guam EPA, from this investigation that was launched 2 years ago?
So I can tell you that, this has been a concern that we've raised with our federal grantors. Certainly finding the solution, finding the source of the contamination is important, but you also have to recognize that this is an unregulated contaminant on the federal level. So, trying to find the justification for unregulated contaminant that has been banned for over 30 years and saying, hey, can you give us funding to, fund the research, it takes time. So we are finding those avenues to find a funding source to fund the study. Like I said, we just met with US EPA, a different program, not the water program, but the CERCLA Superfund. So they have visited their installation restoration program sites. And from that discussion and from what they know out of the groundwater monitoring data that they've seen, which is, you know, so Dieldrin is not considered a contaminant of concern in that program. So we have to justify them opening up an investigation under the CERCLA Superfund program to conduct an investigation under that program. So we said, well, if we can take soil samples from where we want to take soil samples and determine that there is presence of Dieldrin in that area, could we then justify the investigation under your program?
Were those soil samples taken 2 years ago? I mean, what was done 2 years ago when this was brought up in that November 2023 meeting?
So that was water. It was a water sample, not a soil sample.
Okay. Well, I guess what samples were taken? What was done then to find the source?
So that water sample, again, like GWA said, it's like a needle in a haystack where, you know, given the you know, Guam's area land size, like where would you think that Dieldrin would be located? Again, it was used legally as an agricultural product. It was used in the foundations of buildings. So it's like, what building used Dieldrin, you know, prior to it being banned in 1987? It could be any building. It could be every building. It could be every home, you know, located in those areas that show detection in those water wells. And whether or not those homes were demolished, their foundations were uprooted, it loosened the soil that contained the Dieldrin, we don't know.
So I guess just in just simple layman's terms, are we basically in the same place we were 2 years ago in trying to determine the source of this contamination?
That is correct. We have our theories, and we are going to look at investigating those theories to see whether or not that turns up, you know, either confirming that that's the source or not. But I think that it's important, like GWA said, it's there. We don't know where it comes from, but it's important that we treat it so that the finished product being distributed is safe.
So we've gotten nowhere in the investigation. I guess 2 years later, so we're talking about GEGO. What about Dieldrin and Mingilao? Because that was also the concern from the article that I was reading and from the board meeting that I watched in November, from November 2023. Should residents of Mingilao and Dieldrin be just as concerned as residents of GEGO? Anyone?
Well, I think when I confirmed with GWA, when M4 was recently taken offline, it was still under the interim action level, but was taken offline in an abundance of caution because it was almost near the IAL. And in terms of D17, it was turned off because it had the exceedance, so that is taken offline, is not distributing water. So neither D17 or M4 is distributing water out of those wells.
Okay. So for the public that's watching, D17, it's across the Northern Community Health Center in Dieldrin, and M4 is near the Marbo Cave in Mingilao. And so this was discovered 2 years ago, and it was just recently shut down, like what, yesterday? Can somebody please tell me?
Well D4 was shut down, I'm sorry, well D17 was shut down July 31st and
Of this year?
of this year, and well M4 was turned off this month, October. I don't recall the exact day.
Again, when was Chico's Y15 shut down?
Y15 is still operational because that is the only well in the Santa Rosa zone, and because it is a large production well that produces normally more than 600 gallons a minute, we don't have the capacity to turn that well off long term without putting a larger area out of water.
Okay, so just in layman's terms again. So since November of 2023, Guam EPA, it's been on their radar that there's been these high levels of dieldrin in the water above the IAC level, and yet we've still been giving this water and supplying this water to residents of Chico, Dededo, and Mangilao.
So just as you're talking about November of 2023 or November of 2020?
Yes, November of 2023 was the Guam EPA board meeting that I watched, where Guam EPA was presenting the severity of the dieldrin contamination in the water. And then, in your timeline, it says December 2023, but the meeting that I watched was from November of 2023. And so I'm just trying to break it down in simple terms for the public that's watching, that these wells were only shut down this year. And yet, we've known about it since 2023, and so residents in these three villages have been drinking this contaminated water, showering in this contaminated water, cooking in this contaminated water.
Right, so again, as a regulatory agency, the IAL was not developed. We had no enforcement authority to require the utility to notify, which is why, as soon as we were notified and as soon as we were done with recovery after Typhoon Mawar, we continued to work on that IAL draft after draft, working with US EPA, the senior toxicologist, on his availability, because it wasn't like we were meeting every single day. It was like, okay, let's schedule a meeting when you're available. Does this time work for you? But, it took us 11 months to be able to, come up with a proposal, work through the scientific basis of that IAL, and then having it approved by our board to have the authority to enforce this interim action level. So in 2023, it was again a federally unregulated contaminant. It was not part of any safe drinking water regulation that we could enforce or US EPA could enforce, because there was no contaminant trigger for any sort of enforcement or compliance action on either US EPA's part or our part.
Okay. Are there any other emerging contaminants that you might have found from the tests that Guam EPA or GWA conducts that the public should be aware of that might result in what we're seeing today with dieldrin?
So we know that law that allowed us to develop interim action levels in 2020 was a result of, the PFAS concern. And, the whole reason...
Wait, aside from PFAS?
I'm sorry?
Aside from PFAS, is there any other emerging contaminants that's on your radar that we should be concerned about?
Not at this point. I think that in the future, we're going to have the same discussion for PFAS, which has a implementation date of 2030, 2031. So that has been pushed back from its original implementation date of around 2027 or 2029, excuse me, and pushed back because they haven't been able to, one, determine a maximum contaminant level or the testing method for PFAS. So while, again, like I said, we know that the GAC systems will not only take care of dieldrin, but will take care of PFAS.
Okay. And I'll just kind of wrap this up because I know my colleagues also have several questions. If I could just get a yes or no. Is the health of Chico residents in danger as of today?
I certainly can't give you an answer. We can tell you what we were, the guidance that we were given from our the senior toxicologist at US EPA.
Public health, maybe you can answer the question?
We would need to, again, like I mentioned in our presentation, to obtain a full or more accurate understanding about the possible impacts of Dieldrin on the health of the residents of Chico, we would need to do a full
Right. So
study.
you plan on conducting a full epidemiological case control study? Is that correct? Or
That
it's
would
just
be the
something written down on a piece of
proposal.
paper?
We are putting together the recommendation or the proposal of what it would take and what it would cost to support that epi study. Whether we do mount that full epi study would be hopefully with the support of the legislature.
Okay, so you're saying that you guys need funding to conduct it, okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Vice Chris Dwiggins.
Susmasi, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Guam Waterworks, Public Health, EPA, for a very comprehensive and educational presentation. And I want to thank all three of the chairpersons for conducting this very, very important and critical hearing for the people of Guam. So without having to go through a series of questions anymore, because I think this panel so far has been very astute at what they've presented and asked so that we can get the information, I'm going to recap what I'm hearing and then ask a few questions based on that. So it seems to me that it's clear on the timelines and what's been going on is that EPA has been working closely with GWA to develop the levels and the test levels to be able to work on these two particular contaminants, known Dieldrin as well as PFAS going forward. That to me has been established. The other issue that I think before us is that there clearly is now a reactionary, and I'd like the engineer to come back up for my question that I'm going to ask when I finish my observation. And so it appears to me as though the action plan that has been put forward after the Dieldrin contaminant levels have been established now in terms of the danger zone, that there is now the action of reaction to be able to mitigate this issue. That's where we're at, essentially. And let's be clear to the public that these have been very, as far as I'm concerned, proactive measures because of the fact that we have taken something that has not been imposed on us by US EPA or others and taken the action to get those minimum levels and move forward. That's what I'm seeing here at this point. So I want to go to the Waterworks first, and I want to coordinate this with Waterworks and EPA and then go to the engineer in terms of the mitigation that's currently underway and going forward. Mr. Cruz and Ms. Lastimoza, I think this is the most important thing that people want to hear right now, is that there is absolute clear coordination between EPA and Waterworks, not just on these 3 wells that have been identified, but on all monitoring throughout Guam based on what these contaminant levels have been, that level that's been reached in terms of what is dangerous to the public as deemed by EPA, and that is what's currently ongoing on a daily basis. Mr. Cruz?
I guess to answer your question, if we are in daily communications or just in communications with regards to mitigation? I
think what people want to know, Mr. Cruz, is that EPA has a standard. You have a testing. Senator Simon Sanchez from CCU was there explaining to the public that the routine rotation of water well inspections and that it is consistent, concise, your reporting on what your findings are, EPA's testing, that this system is robust and is being done on a daily basis, and that information sharing is being done on a daily basis. This didn't just pop up right now, although maybe we would have done a lot better at public information on what's going on, that this has been a constant monitoring that's been going on based on EPA's work to come up with these levels and monitoring.
Yes, I'm going to say we are in a testing on a daily basis, rotation-wise, sharing the information with Guam EPA, and essentially collaborating on any emerging issues. and then bringing the engineering into play. So the answer I'm going to say is yes, we are in communications.
EPA, do you concur with that, that since you've developed this minimum levels and that you've implemented what is now enforceable, that this system is working?
Yes, that's correct, Senator. So actually, up until even after the town hall meeting, the general manager and I had like daily phone calls where he would provide me updates of, what it is they were doing, up until the point where they installed the 2 GAC systems. He gave me a daily call on the play-by-play of, what was being done. They were transporting the GAC systems, they were installing it, they were putting the foundation down, they were changing out the media. So there was, at one point, daily communication by phone call where he would update me on the status of their mitigation efforts.
Michelle, based on your work and your work with GWA, this is how the system was set up to capture this data and create the situation whereby you take action, correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay. So on the engineering side, and I'll just wrap up in a moment. So do you believe now there's been an establishment of best practices, if you will, of rapid response? Because it seems like although you've been under procurement because you've known of this issue and the need, GWA has had the need for this mitigation capability, do you believe what's been put in place both procurement-wise and the equipment that you're getting for treatment is robust and moving forward?
The interim treatment system that we've installed is performing its job and the water is being treated. We still need to continue pressing forward and get the permanent solution installed at Y15 and the other 2 wells. And a separate but related issue, the PFAS, the original date was 2029, but it's moved back. But we do realize that island-wide, many of our wells are going to need treatment in the future to address those issues. We have already started the design work that's going to address the island-wide issue of emerging contaminants, PFAS in particular, but as has been mentioned, the treatment systems that we plan on installing should address not just PFAS, but a plethora of other contaminants that possibly could be in the system. So we're looking forward to completing that design work and moving forward. I think it was mentioned earlier in the presentation, we plan on spending somewhere around $200 million adding treatment island-wide before the PFAS rules come into effect.
Mr. Cruz, that $200 million of which the gentleman speaks is what's already been acquired, my understanding, and it's currently in an investment account?
I'm advised that a portion of it is because along with other regulations are on our wastewater side, so our, the partial consent decree that GWA currently is having to address, from USCPA, some of the fundings that you were mentioning is geared towards that. So there's both sides of the house, water and wastewater improvements.
But funding is being realized and timelines are in place to meet the requirements of the 29 that's now been moved to 30.
Correct.
Okay. Back to the engineering side, do you believe that as you move forward on the wells, whether large, small, or whatever the variety you have, the system you have for mitigation can be duplicated over and over for treatment?
We're just beginning the design work for the island-wide emerging contaminants, PFAS, setup, but our initial intention is that we'll probably install regional treatment systems rather than individual systems on every one of the 120 wells.
But you could respond in the event that individual wells start popping up with the same situation we have now.
We are aware that we could have a potential problem sooner than the final solution is in place, and we are looking at options and alternatives to potentially be able to address anything else that comes up between now and having our final treatment system in place.
It just seems to me like, I mean, and I'm glad, and people want to hear this, it just seems to me like when the awareness was there, it seems like there was a turn and burn because this system's in pretty quick. Would you say that?
I think our contractor did an excellent job quickly refurbishing the vessels that were at F8 and relocating them to Y15. And I think that we are addressing the issue, but like I mentioned earlier, we don't have them in a lead lag configuration, and this is an interim step toward getting the final treatment system in place.
People want to hear that you're either going to mitigate it or shut it down. Is that what's going to happen?
Well, in the case of Y15, we did not have the luxury of being able to shut that well off due to other system constraints in how the water to that particular area is dependent upon the Y15 production. So we've been able to get that interim treatment system in place quickly.
And so EPA, all you're looking at right now is, or what you're looking at right now, thank you, what you're looking at right now is the ability then to establish the plan on when you say safe, whether it's the full 4 quarters or whether you work out a different system internally.
Right, or we keep the advisory in place because that's how it's listed in our interim action level. And then, just maybe press out weekly or monthly that there is still a no detect, so to ensure that the water is safe, but because there isn't that that structure in the IAL to lift it until we have 4 quarters of data. So that's, that might be the way that we go. But again, if we're advised that we could lift it by either revising the IAL and going through that process, then that's what we'll do. But, the way that it stands on most safe drinking water standards, it's those 4 quarters of data to determine compliance.
Mr. Chair, just a real quick closing comment. I go down this line of questioning because public confidence is so important right now. And knowing where we're at and what we're doing is got to be clear. I don't want to downplay it for even 1 second, the impact of what we're talking about here and how we need to make sure, absolutely sure, that our water is safe to drink, consume, and use in all phases. But I think the most important thing that people want to hear out of this today is that you're on it and that you're able to mitigate it.
I think we can be very transparent, GWA and Guam EPA, by sharing those results as soon as they're available. Right now, they're doing it weekly, and right now it's showing non-detect. When we go to monthly, we'll share those results to, again, demonstrate that there's either non-detect or there's breakthrough. So at any point, we'll always just be transparent with what the results will show from the finished water.
I know it's never going to be satisfactory enough, but that's what I wanted to hear today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Duenas. Senator Lai.
So just Masi, Mr. Chair, thank you all for your testimony today and for your work on this, and for the people of GEGO for your patience as the government works this all out and tries to get the water safe for you. And I want to thank all those companies and the efforts of the residents of GEGO and others who've been providing this water to the people of GEGO immediately, and now GWA's continued efforts in that regard as well. Can I just, big picture, go back? Am I understanding correctly that you suspect Superfund sites to be the source?
I think from the data that we talked about earlier this week, that there could be justification from their program, from the results that they have as a result of managing that program, that we could justify an investigation on their end that could then lead to Dieldrin being a contaminant of concern under that program. Currently, it's not. So we're going to have to, take soil samples to determine whether or not.
And if it
we-
becomes of concern, that means they would also make sure that that is cleaned up, any
Correct.
sources. All right,
Correct.
thank you. And you're continuing to investigate other sources?
We do have a specific theory, and I think that that's what we're going to proceed with the basis of our justification.
All right. What about GWA? Do you also conduct an investigation as to the source?
Senator, unfortunately, GWA, that's not our, I mean, for us to go look for the source, not our capability, but we would assist in whatever way with Guam EPA.
Is there any risk that this contamination will spread in the aquifer to other wells?
Is there any, I mean, it's something that could be looked at, but I can't give a definitive answer whether it can or cannot be spread.
All right. And so EPA said that there's no other contaminants that are currently kind of like, I forgot the terminology, up and coming for emerging. Yes. So, but PFAS and Dieldrin, and GWA is already investing in treating for PFAS, and that would treat for Dieldrin as well, right? With this island-wide treatment that they're planning. And they're still going forward with that, right? You haven't put that on hold because of the changed timelines?
No.
All right. And can you just give us some kind of assurance? So if EPA knew since 2012 of high levels, and according to public health, 2013 levels were 2.0, is that like above the level that we're at today, right? 1.6, is that, am I reading that correctly? So, but they were under no obligation back then to report, and I know you said none of you were there at that time. How do we ensure that this doesn't happen again going forward? What are you going to do? Does the public get to know what you know, even if they're not regulated contaminants?
I guess we would have to look at, unregulated contaminants that, have the potential risk to impact human health. Maybe we need to do an audit on something like that and whether or not an IAL for some other contaminant is warranted. At this time, we're not aware of any, other than Dieldrin, which was reported to us by the NEIC, which took water samples and, whatever tests they ran, Dieldrin was the only contaminant of concern that they brought to our attention at the time in 2023. So certainly, I think our safe drinking water is always on top of any exceedances. If it's part of the safe drinking water requirements, they're always quick to brief me on, any type of exceedance or violation. So I have every confidence in my staff that they will share with me and, take action.
All right, so it took 1 year from that report from the NEIC of the high Dieldrin that you found in 2023. So even ignoring from 2012 to 2023, when you found it in 2023, it took still a year for the IAL to be approved. And I know you said in there was, of course, Typhoon Mawar, May 2023, right when you were getting started. All right, but right now, are you satisfied that the public is fully informed of what they should know? For example, sorry, let me just ask Public Health something. So we know you're saying you can't find anything conclusive, of course, but we do know the risks, that why it's an emergent contaminant in the first place, what its risks are, cancer and other neurological diseases, you said.
Correct.
But have we a study of I mean, are we able to increase, for example, cancer screening for the GEGO residents or anything like that so that you can find out right away?
Yes. Yep. That was one of so there are 2 recommendations, and our chief medical officer here can explain if the clinical side, but my recommendation was to conduct this EPI study, so that's just focusing on those who already have breast cancer detected, and then match them up with the control, someone who doesn't. But then there's also the public health approach for procuring blood testing or whole serum testing, and then reaching out to the community, the affected community, to screen them. To go to the residents, knock on their doors, go to the hard-to-reach populations, and ask them about their exposure history, but to also offer them this screening test. And then if there's levels of Dieldrin, which has been shown to bioaccumulate in the fat tissue or the adipose tissue, if there's Dieldrin detected in the human body of those affected residents, they can be connected to services.
All right, and does GWA have a map, or have they provided to the residents of Guam a map that shows which wells are connected to which households? So they would know whether they were on well M4, D17, or Y15?
Our engineering is going to respond to that.
We have a combined distribution system where the wells pump directly into the piping that goes to domestic supply. And so it's fairly complicated to analyze, other than a general area, where exactly the water's going, because it's being blended in the distribution system from multiple sources. And typically we have a hydraulic model that we use to help us determine how the water is flowing in the pipes. And it changes throughout the day as the demand and production levels change.
Can you explain why only some customers were taken off of the Y15 well and the others were left on? I mean, how does that coincide with what you just explained?
For the particular area of Santa Rosa, there are 3 ways that GWA has to get water into that area. We have Y15, which is the only production well serving that area. That well typically produces around 600 gallons per minute of water, which is not enough water to serve the zone. We typically make up that difference by pumping water in from the GEGO booster pump station, which is located at the GEGO tank site on Route 1 near the Anderson main gate. We also have another pump station at the intersection of Back Road and Gallinero. We typically do not operate that pump station because it typically, when we do operate it, it typically causes some lower water pressures on the suction side of that pump station. When the Dieldrin issue cropped up and we were looking at what possible things we could do, the operations personnel were able to close a valve just north of the Gallinero booster pump station on Back Road, isolating, basically turning the Santa Rosa zone in half, cutting it in half, and turning on the GEGO booster pump station, moving water not affected by Y15 from the GEGO zone into the southern portion of the Santa Rosa zone. So with the way the system was piped and plumbed and the pumping infrastructure that we had, we were able to take a number of residents off of the Y15 water by doing those system changes.
Senator, if I may ask, I mean, this adjustment is not the norm, right? It was just something we were able to figure out, because of how the piping is. But this is not how we would normally operate the Santa Rosa zone.
All right, so you put the protections onto the well temporarily, and water is being provided to all households now? I mean, it's never been stopped? Just safe water? Let me say that again.
The water leaving Y-15 is now being treated and is non-detect for Dieldrin.
All right. There's been an emergency water outage almost every day on my phone from GWA. Is this exacerbated by this Dieldrin situation at all? Or is it causing it, or are they related? And also low water pressure in some of the villages?
I'm going to say there's no connection between the Dieldrin issue and the outages. A lot of the outages are due to mainline breaks that our crews just have to go and make the repair and then get the water back up and running.
All right. And so all the wells that have been tested, you've told us there's like 60-some% that have some Dieldrin, but not on the caution level yet. Those are continuing to be monitored regularly? How regular?
The entry points to the distribution system are tested quarterly.
Quarterly? And why, none of the three listed here is the Camp Blas that Simon Sanchez was talking about. Why is he talking about Camp Blas? Do you test on the military bases as well?
The military has their own water system. They do their own testing, and we're not privy
Are
to
you
that
able to do that?
data.
Are you able to do that? Well, do you get the results?
Guam EPA
You
gets
do?
the results, but GWA does not.
All right, so what does he mean about Camp Blas?
I'm not sure what he's referring to
He
with
was
Camp
saying that
Blas,
levels of Camp Blas were very high as well for Dieldrin, but I've never seen that in the paper.
we haven't.
Are you aware of that, GWA? No. All right.
So just to let you know, Anderson and Navy were both informed in a July 2025 letter that they were subject to the interim action level to start monitoring for Dieldrin in their waters.
All right, and they give you the results?
They should. They will.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My time is up.
Thank you, Senator Lai. Senator Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, that's my concern is that where does this water go? Because it would seem it's blended. So the water coming from Y-15, does it reach throughout the island, or where does it stop being sent? Can you give a definitive answer of that?
On back road to Anderson in the vicinity of Windy Road, there is a pressure regulating valve that is normally kept closed, and the Gallinero pump station is normally kept turned off, and so those are boundaries that we enforce on the piping that create that Santa Rosa pressure zone. So under normal operating conditions, the only sources of water going into the Santa Rosa zone are Y-15 and the water that we move in from the GEGO tank site using the GEGO booster pump station. And that booster pump station is set on a variable frequency drive with a pressure set point that the operations personnel use to keep the appropriate level in the Santa Rosa tank.
Can I also just my name is Evangeline Lujan, I'm the Senior Regulatory Analyst. I just wanted to make a little bit of a correction on the frequency of well testing, and it's just dependent on, they're not always tested every quarter, not all of them every quarter. It just depends on the constituent that we're testing for. Some of them are required yearly, some of them are required every 3 years, so it's different. But we do get regular testing for majority of the wells quarterly, but not all of them. But for Dieldrin, we are going to be testing very frequently, so that data will be published on our website as well as sharing it with Guam EPA. But may I just add something as well, since I'm here? One of the things that is very concerning to us is that we do have a wellhead protection, and that wellhead protection is really to manage development around each of the wells. And this Dieldrin issue is just something that is something that now we see as a result of uncontrolled development happening out there, that really we need to have stronger regulations regarding the type of development around GWA's wellheads. And so I know that in some instances, even in previous bills that have been proposed here or brought up to this body, sometimes we have a very difficult time expressing the concern that we have related to some kind of uncontrolled development. Illegal dumping is a big issue that we see. We don't know if this illegal dumping, especially around the GEGO area, is a cause of some of these emerging contaminant concerns. But this is something I think that we really as a community need to really concentrate on how we can address these and provide the appropriate resources to Guam EPA so that they can go out and enforce those regulations. The other thing is that I want to let the public know that GWA on a daily basis goes out to test the water within the distribution system. I know today we talked a lot about the testing of the wells, but in addition to the wells, we also test the water within the distribution, the water that comes directly to your house. And so that is done throughout the entire island twice a month. We have a very vigorous schedule that we are required to do as a requirement under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and so all of that data is always brought to Guam EPA. Every month we provide all that data. In addition, we also provide whenever there is a thing called, so today we're talking about Dieldrin, but on a regular basis we talk about, sometimes our wells have E. coli in it, where then we issue a boil water notice to all the residents that are affected by this. And so that is also something that is an immediate concern. We always try to find out what the source of that, because we do an investigation with Guam EPA on the source of E. coli or total coliform. When we get a hit within our wells on that, we try to find the source, and in some instances, and we have had this situation in GEGO, where we cannot find the source because either leaking septic tanks, illegal dumping, farms, a lot of ungulates, so pigs, cows, everywhere, that contribute, especially if they're close by to our wells. And so a stronger wellhead protection needs to be developed or updated, because we do have that in place, but sometimes it's very difficult for us to control the type of development around our wells. So we really want to be able to work with Guam EPA as well as with this body on trying to control some of the development that is occurring, so that in the future, some of these other contaminants that we're not talking about today, we will not have the same issue in the future. So thank you.
All right, thank you. So I wanted to follow up the question regarding distribution, because we know there's wells that have tested above, levels where it's neurotoxic. And so the 3 wells that were highlighted in this report today is Y15, D17, and M4. And so the concern is from constituents that I'm getting is, how far is this water reaching to other residents of the island? That's a question, one question.
The D17 well near the Northern Public Health Center is near a dead end on the distribution system piping, and so that water serves the immediate customers in that area and then travels north and picks up water from D18, D16, and some other wells that blend along the way as it goes into that area of I believe that's the Barragata pressure zone. And well, M4 is in the Atacao area, and that piping is also connected or interconnected with wells M1, M2, M3, EX11, and a couple of other M-series wells in that area. So again, that water is being blended in the distribution system with those other wells serving that area, and then that piping is connected to the piping on back road.
So what's the extent of, as far as residents getting this water? So you talked about it's going north or going east, or what is the distribution?
Yeah, that's really a question that's only answerable with a water hydraulic model looking at where the water's going in the piping.
Okay, so will it go south from where, you're saying it's an endpoint, so it's picking up water. So for instance, D17 is picking up water from D18. Who gets that water?
All the customers along the route of that distribution transmission line.
So is Barragata one of those places?
That's part of the Barragata pressure zone, but that area is in Dededo. And then on the M4 side, that water, the excess water, flows down back road toward Manilao.
Yeah, I think that's what we need, is we need clarity about who is affected from this source of water, because apparently it's not localized, from what I'm hearing. It's not localized to one area. It's spreading. So that's what we need to find out. In regards to the interim action level, so it was based on cancer risk at the high end of 1 in 10,000 getting cancer. In my letter to Guam EPA regarding comments, I proposed for much lower levels, considering the chronic exposure of contaminants that we've been exposed to here in Guam throughout the years, and due to the those that are populations that are more vulnerable. And that's something I would like to see more towards a non-detect as you determine the MCLs for a permanent level. So was there any, with your toxicologist, was there any discussion about the neurotoxic effects, the effects to liver, immune toxic effects in bringing down that interim action level?
Thank you. Sierra Armstrong Bettis. I can just speak a little bit on that topic because, of course, I'm not the toxicologist who we're working with. So we set the second level right at 0.5 micrograms per liter, and that was to account for the neurotoxicological level, the non-cancer, and the cancer levels. So it was actually at a higher level is where you see the neurotoxicological.
Yeah, okay, so so the cancer level is a lower level, but again, the 1 in 1 million, or the 1 in 1 million would have been a 0.02, I believe. Is that right, 0.02?
0.002.
2 parts per billion, and that should have been, I felt, a better level than the 0.2 that you have currently. Because if you think about it, 1 in 10,000, that's how many residents of Guam versus 1 in a million, right? So we really need to be more rigorous in setting these levels, I feel, because we're different. You know, Guam's different from what you see. We just have more of a toxic burden. So the question for GWA, so there's 81 wells that you've detected, from what my understanding, or 83 wells, is that corrected, that have detect levels of Dieldrin?
It's either 83 or 84 that have had a Dieldrin detection under 50% of the IAL. So the 124 locations that are tested, I think it's 32 of them are non-detect, 83 of them are 50% of the IAL or lower, and there are only 9 that are testing above 50% of the IAL.
So if we were to lower the MCL, let's say we have a lower level, is GWA prepared to treat the water to address so that we have non-detect levels in those other wells?
That will eventually be addressed when we get the PFAS treatment systems deployed to treat PFAS at all of the well sites that require treatment. But until then, I'd have to look at the numbers, but I suspect that lowering the IAL would potentially be an issue with being able to deploy treatment fast enough to still make enough water.
Okay, and as far as the status of the multi-district litigation for GWA?
Thanks, Senator. Can you clarify? Are you talking about the PFAS litigation?
Correct.
Okay, and you're asking for a status? So the status is Guam Waterworks Authority has filed claims, and so we are claimants in the class action lawsuit. And to date, there have been 3 manufacturers that have entered into settlement agreements with the court in the multi-district litigation, and of those, I'm sorry, 3 plaintiffs, and of the, no, I'm sorry, defendants. And of the 3 defendants, 3M is the only manufacturer who has confirmed settlement numbers. So we are going to issue press release soon sharing that we have received settlement monies from 3M already. And so again, of the 3 plaintiffs that have confirmed and have had approved settlements go before the court in the multi-district litigation, only 3M has confirmed a settlement amount, and that's the status. And the other 2 defendants, although they've been approved for settlement, there have been no confirmed confirmed amounts announced, no disbursement schedule, et cetera. And that includes the DuPont Manufacturing Company, and then there's also Tyco and BASF, which is another set of manufacturers that are plaintiffs in the class action suit. Is that Andrew?
Yes, thank you for that. And so we heard that the treatment for PFAS can also be used to treat Dieldrin. And so how soon can that be used to, I guess, for these treatments to occur? Any timelines for that? Treatment of water.
We have recently gotten the design contract in place to begin the design work, and we anticipate that it's going to take at least a year to work through the design work, and then there would be a construction timeline following that. Again, because of the magnitude of the work that will be required to do this, we anticipate having these systems in place ahead of the PFAS deadlines, but that's 2029 or later.
Okay, so question for Department of Public Health. So if you look at one of the slides that shows high rates, the expected rates, so one of them is 1.24 in Molesso. And I've noticed that there's trending in the southern villages. They're trending higher in Alahan and Satarina Sumai. Do they receive water from the north?
From the Department of Public Health side, I wouldn't be aware of where the residents in the southern portion of Guam receive their water. Although I will say that some of those the incidence ratios might have been influenced by the small population size of those villages, which is why we were seeing a lot higher. Again, it will take a lengthier EPI study for us to better assess that.
Okay, the other thing is for Division Chief Nadeau, you mentioned that you were able to reopen some water vendors because they had alternate approved sources. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. First, let me clarify that our division, we do not regulate the water. We regulate the establishment that will receive the water and indirectly regulate the water that are used by the water vending machines. But even at that, the machine can only accept and use approved water, meaning water that's been approved for drinking by Guam EPA. And when we're first notified, prior to confirmation by testing that these 3 water vending machines are able to actually process internally to remove dieldrin. We had instructed them to cease operation, but after the testing confirmed that they're able to process and remove dieldrin, we allowed them to open. Those 3 manufacturing establishments that currently not operating is by choice that decided not to find alternate water source to operate. But upon hearing that the well, the affected well is now able to treat it, we just need to follow with Guam EPA as to whether we'll allow that facility to operate, to open up. I'm not sure if I clearly answer your question, but I'm more than happy to further clarify.
Yeah, I guess my concern is because it seems like there wasn't a clear guidance as to determine when a well is okay to use, and in this particular, maybe if you can clarify, this particular water vendor was allowed to reuse or open up?
Which particular establishment, ma'am?
So in your presentation.
Okay. So of the 11 permitted operation, only 3 are currently not in operation. Those that are in operation, they were allowed to operate because 1, they were not using the water for consumption, or 2, like water vending machines, they were tested and deemed able to process the water, and Guam EPA confirmed that, so we got their approval to have them open. And UP Elementary School, GWA did install the necessary system to remove dieldrin from the water fountains and the sinks for the cafeteria.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at your actual presentation. It states that DEH revisited the 3 affected water vending machines to inform them that the Guam EPA test results, which met standards, and allow them to reopen on September 30th, 2025. So my question is, because there hasn't been a clear guidance on how to determine whether a water source is good to use again, if that's clear, if that's my understanding, then how was this vending machine operation allowed to open and restore, I guess, continue supplying water? Can you clarify that?
So I think the way that we were looking at approved water source under DEH was the inlet. So the connection from the utility provided water into those vending machines. And then after that inlet, it becomes public health's jurisdiction as a regulated food establishment. So if the source is not approved, and in this case it's under the advisory of do not drink without treatment, they did not consider it as an approved source, which is why they closed down that vending machine. But we know from after Mawar that these vending machines are equipped with the filtration system or reverse osmosis that can remove dieldrin. So we tested the finished water, so the water that came out of the vending machine, to determine whether or not the dieldrin was present. And the results indicated non-detect. So then we shared that information with DEH, and they determined that the water was free of dieldrin, and they reopened those vending machines.
Okay, so basically they were able to have treatment, but it's not because of the source of where the water was coming from.
Correct. The equipment itself provided the treatment.
Okay, so that's something that I've also advocated, is regulations that need to be created for these vendors, which is also Guam EPA is authorized to do so. The one more question, if I can ask, is the capacity for biomonitoring, and what is the treatment for individuals that have high levels of dieldrin in their system?
I would defer. I'm not a clinician, so I defer to our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Robert L.G.
Hi, my name is Dr. Robert Leon Guerrero. I'm Chief Medical Officer, Department of Public Health. There is no treatment for dieldrin, unfortunately. We got to realize that dieldrin was banned back in the 80s in the U.S. and by most of the world by the Stockholm Convention in 2004, not because of cancer, but because of the neurotoxic effects of dieldrin. The studies that were done showed that they cause convulsions, death, uncontrolled muscle spasms. But the problem with cancer was not really noted for the compound to be banned. That was not until later on that they started doing some studies, most specifically in Europe, where they looked at Dieldrin levels, and that's where they started seeing that there were some problems with cancer. Specifically, breast cancer was one of them. They noticed that there was an 7 to 8 time increase risk for breast cancer in women who had Dieldrin levels. And then those that had Dieldrin levels had a higher risk of an aggressive type of breast cancer. But that study is just a was not really, it's not been, they're not doing too much more because, like I said, the compound is banned. And so most people don't feel that there's a need to study something that's we're not exposed, or the compound has been banned. What public health was proposing was that we do our own study where we measure Dieldrin levels in females and compare their risk. Again, that's a study that's going to cost $200 million, something like that. And of course, we don't have that kind of funding.
Thank you, Senator Barris.
Can I ask one more question?
One more.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one more question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the other thing is that Dieldrin is also regulated under the Clean Water Act. So what is Guam EPA prepared to do should you find the source? I mean, what do you have as your enforcement capability?
It's not regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and when we do find the source...
Yeah, the Clean Water Act is what I said.
Clean Water
yeah.
Act.
It is mentioned in the toxic pollutants under GAR. Actually, it's in GAR.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so we do also monitor under the total maximum daily loads in the under the Clean Water Act. So we have had detection in our recreational water. So we actually have, a report and approval on our actions on that end. But I don't know what we'll do when we find the source. I don't know whether or not there's any liability, that we could pursue. When we do find a source, we may never find a source. So I think that when we cross that bridge, and after the study is conducted, and we are either to, can determine or not determine a source, I think we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it.
Thank you. Senator Gubatauta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for being with us this morning. I just want to go back to GWA if I could, because I don't have a lot of time, but is there any chance that Jigo is not the only affected village impacted via these 3 wells? Is it just Jigo only?
I'm sorry, just so I understand your question, the 3 wells, D17,
Yes, the
M4,
3 wells that it's been kind of talked about much of the day.
Right.
Is it a strong chance that it's not the only village affected?
Yes, Jigo is not the only village affected because, like Brett was mentioning, Y15 is in like the back road Jigo area. D17 is located in the Dedadu public health area, and then M4 is in the Atacao area. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Jigo is not the only location where these wells are at, and that's the source.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Is there any other resources that can help in the testing outside of Eurofins that were brought forward by GWA? I know we have our WERI at the university that, there's institutions all across this region, higher educational resources that can maybe help look at this idea or look at the Dieldrin in our water systems?
Jennifer Cruz, the laboratory administrator at GWA. GOG is planning on expanding its capability, but they don't have the instrumentation. And Eurofins is the largest certified laboratory in the United States, and we have a contract with them, so we send all samples to them.
Thank you so much. This is such a fascinating discussion today, and I just want to kind of go sticking with this idea of the research. And maybe EPA, you can help us with this again, going off of what Senator Sanchez mentioned earlier. So is there any idea what the U.S. Navy's level of Dieldrin is on their facilities today? Are they reporting it back to you at all?
Could you repeat that question, Senator?
What is the U.S. Navy's level of Dieldrin? Are they reporting it at all?
So the last time they reported was in 2007.
With all this happening right now, wouldn't a phone call to them and asking how that's coming along, would that be important in the discussion today?
Absolutely, which is why we sent them a letter in July notifying them of the IAL and the requirement to test.
Thank you so much for that. If I can, I just wanted to go back a little bit to Dr. Bob's kind of comments. What discussion, if any, has been put forward by Guam EPA, GWA, any relevant decision makers regarding the possibility of including a review of the medical concerns of residents impacted by short and long-term exposure to Dieldrin, and to what extent can the assistance offered thus far from U.S. EPA support such an initiative if implemented or otherwise required perhaps by court order? Going back to the idea, it wasn't just long, it was in 2024, it was in this, if I recall it correctly in my research, on April 3rd, US EPA was in this room, I believe, and you reported that the Y15 water well had levels to cause liver damage. Enough, it was in your presentation. I know it wasn't in the discussion. Why put it if it wasn't an imminent threat to the people of Jigo? And could we study it, perhaps?
So we've had internal discussion within the department and put forth those two recommendations. The first one being the full epidemiology study that I've kept bringing up about matching someone who has breast cancer, measuring their exposure history to account for Dieldrin amongst other carcinogens or cancer-causing chemicals or risk factors, and comparing the risk of development of breast cancer to a control group, someone who doesn't have breast cancer but is similarly exposed. We also have the other approach, the public health approach, about dispatching our mobile health clinic and possibly reaching out to the community, the affected residents of Jigo, by knocking on their door, going to their house, going to their posting up town halls, or just conducting these outreach events to screen them. And that's the discussion we've had so far. To clarify, it would cost no more than $3 million in terms of.
I was going to say, Dr. Bob's $200 million quote would have blown it out. I think it was probably less to study some, as you know, Patrick, I was with you when we were studying COVID-related types of illnesses. So $200 million, Dr. Bob, I think would be a lot of money for a lot, maybe other practical applications here.
So based off of the advisory that went out, it said 1,112 ratepayers. I assume that's one person. I'm assuming that's one person. I know it could be one person that represents several different houses. If we average that out or account for the average household size, that's about 3,825 individuals in the affected area. To create a buffer, we included 50% more, and each test would cost no more than $300, so that would be $1,700,000.
Well, I'm hoping that after this discussion today that perhaps our friends at GWA, EPA, and Public Health, as you guys get together to discuss perhaps looking at that a little bit more. I know that your data that you presented today was, thank you for sharing that, Patrick, and I know then we look at maybe beyond this, those we may see. It's just as Simon mentioned earlier that, you know, when we stopped treating our homes, I don't know, I didn't build a home in Jigo after 1987 or the like, if it was even touched there, and other parts of the island where perhaps that was used. But as we, over the next 5 or 10 years, this might not be the only discussion we'll have. This might happen again. And I just want to say that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time. Oh, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and Mr. Chair for all of your work on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gumatano. Senator Barnett.
Si dos masia, Mr. Chair, and Biba Betness to the people of Guam, and also want to just recognize that my colleagues and people of Guam who are wearing pink in support of breast cancer, survivors of breast cancer awareness today. You know, one of the retiring speakers, one of my colleagues had talked about public confidence right now, and I think when you come out and tell the people of Guam that their water is contaminated, and then come to find out that you knew the water was contaminated at least since 2012, I'm not sure how much we say in here is going to instill the people of Guam's confidence in any of the agencies that are seated before us. And I say that with all the due respect, because most of you weren't in working in the capacities that you're working in today back in 2012. But I believe Senator Sanchez was, so I'm a little disappointed that he's not here to address some of the concerns. And I was further disappointed by what I felt was his downplaying, and maybe some of my colleagues might even say mansplaining of this issue. I mean, to even characterize PFAS contamination as drinking Tupperware water, I think is a little flippant and dismissive. And to also further characterize Dieldrin as being okay when the Department of Agriculture in the 1970s, basically ended its use. And then in 1987, it was banned outright. And I don't think you can downplay this or mansplain this to the people of Jigo, the people of these areas impacted. I don't think you can downplay it to Mayor Lizama and Vice Mayor Blas, who have been working very hard to serve the people of Jigo in this time of crisis. And I think when you come out and you tell the people of Guam that the water is contaminated, and then, you know, we try and explain these things like it's an emerging contaminated, not regulated on the federal government side. I think, you know, no pun intended, it does muddy the water just a little bit. And so I kind of wanted to just start with the ma'am who had talked about the testing of the wells, because I know that some of my colleagues have brought up the issue of the water possibly blending with other sites. And so in the 80-some wells that tested positive with levels below the accepted levels, have we done retesting of those wells since those initial tests? And then what's like the timeline on the testing of those other wells? Thank you.
So the interim action level is requiring us to sample quarterly, with the exception of Y15, which we are sampling weekly, and the 9 wells that are at or above 50%, we will be sampling monthly.
I guess my question for maybe Mr. Cruz would be the appropriate one. I mean, given everything that's happened, do you think that we should be testing any of these other wells more frequently? At least until, you know, these concerns are allayed?
Are you referring to the different wells, what she just mentioned, like the rest of the wells? Go ahead.
I can answer that. Testing it more frequently will not give us a more meaningful data because of groundwater systems being just gradual, the movement is gradual. So quarterly is the standard practice of testing because it covers all seasons and the different environmental conditions which will capture the changes. So monthly is even a more frequent sampling, but this is something that we have committed to, so that's what we're going to do.
Okay, I asked because I have a lot of constituents who have been messaging the entire hearing, and they're very consistent in what they're saying is that they want the water tested. And, you know, I'm encouraged that, and I've been following this issue. If you weren't in the media or you weren't in the legislature, it might be a little difficult to track the status of Dieldrin as a contaminant and how the federal entities have dealt or not dealt with it. So I think, you know, the effort that we're undergoing through the hard work of Senator Perez here is to be commended, and that we are really, I think, ahead of the curve with dealing with this contamination. I wanted to ask though, so we were informed in 2012 by Guam EPA investigators of Dieldrin contamination, and largely this wasn't made very public until November of 2023. So in the 11 years between that, maybe Guam Waterworks can answer this, was there any disclosure to the public about Dieldrin contamination? And if so, in what form was that disclosure made?
The disclosure of the Dieldrin results were in our annual water quality report. That is
that's kind of the
very basic. That was the
right. But if you read these water quality reports, I mean, they kind of bury the lead on Dieldrin contamination, because all the water quality reports that you guys come out with basically say, "Hey, our water is so outstanding, please drink it." And I understand that, and this is where it gets a little muddy again, is that you're not necessarily required to report or even act on this because this contaminant is not regulated by the federal government. And so, again, in the annual water quality report, where would the average consumer of GWA water find that there's Dieldrin contamination?
First of all, we state that the water is safe based on the regulations, so we met all the requirements and all below the MCL, so that's what we considered safe, and therefore that's when we report it's safe to drink. And to your question about where the Dieldrin report is on the tables. If you find it in the report, you have tables, primary drinking water regulations, and then you have others, and we place the Dieldrin there and show the range that it was detected.
And that was in the presentation, but I just, sitting here and watching that presentation, it was almost as if there was an implication that the people of Guam should have known about this contamination if they'd only read the very minuscule fine print in these annual water quality reports.
So, Senator, I'd like to respond to that. So there is a difference and a clear distinction between detections and contamination. So although there were detections back in 2012, there were no studies completed to determine health risk factors, and that's already been, reported to you. So whether or not, a detection is actually a contamination and what exposure levels are safe, all of those studies were not performed until, much later in 23 and 24 when it was finally adopted by Guam EPA. And so I think the suggestion that, GWA didn't notify, I guess, the public earlier.
Those weren't my words, ma'am. In fact, I said that you did notify the public by including this information in the water quality report.
So the information has been available, but I think what the public wants to know is, why didn't you tell us that it was a harm? And our response is that it wasn't studied. It wasn't fully studied. We had no conclusions to rely on from experts, health experts. The health experts have come before this body today to illustrate that there really is a science and there is discussions that require, a deep study before any information is released to the public. And I guess that's what we just want to clarify to you, Senator Barnett, and to any other senator, and of course to the public. We take, the criticisms, the allegations, the threats very seriously, and we want to ensure, that we keep the public's trust. And that's why we just want to clarify. Everything that's been disclosed in our consumer confidence reports, the water quality, that is the information that was available to the Guam Waterworks Authority at the time. And any discussions about adverse health risks, those were all public. I mean, they were held in public forums, public hearings, and so that information was discussed before this body, the Guam legislature, in January of 2024. And, so this idea, I guess, that we haven't been explaining enough, we again we accept the criticism, and if the public requires, more information to help understand the risks, I think public health has already responded.
Well, they haven't
we're
responded
going to respond.
conclusively, ma'am. And frankly, we wouldn't be having this hearing if there wasn't a risk. And just because, it's a B2 on the cancer classification table doesn't mean there are adverse health effects that are caused by, Dieldrin ingestion, contamination, detection, or whatnot. I'm very short on the time, but I did want to ask Director Lastimoza 2 questions. What is the status on the emerging contamination funds provided by U.S. EPA?
So we applied for a non-competitive grant for emerging contaminants 4 years ago. So we currently have 4 years of that 5-year grant. We've already been notified that we will not receive year 5 of that grant money. So that was a 5-year grant, $45 million. So we've received 4 years of that grant money currently in our accounts. And that is to build capacity for our laboratory services for emerging contaminants.
Thank you. And I just want to lastly raise this point because we're talking about informing the public, and the government of Guam knew as far back as 2012, and there was no public notification. But I'm looking at a notification from Hawaii that was issued in 2015 informing their water consumers of positive results for Dieldrin. And so I'm just saying, if the people of Hawaii were notified by their utilities stakeholders about this contamination as far back as 2015, and the government of Guam leaders knew in 2012, I'm just saying that, Mosqueda and Sangani, the people, that this is a contaminated, it's an emerging contaminant, although it's not regulated by the federal government. It is potentially a cause for concern, and the state of Hawaii has notified their people about Dieldrin positive test results. And so I'm just saying, comparatively, if you have a state like Hawaii that chose to inform its people as far back as 2015, even though this Dieldrin isn't regulated by the federal government, I think, in erring on the side of caution, being prudent, absolutely the people of Guam should have been told, informed. And I'm not talking about fine print on a water quality report. And I want to go back to 2015 because I remember at the time, GWA was on a big campaign about drink the tap water. And they'd hired different athletes to talk about, I think I might have even done a commercial about, hey, the tap water is safe to drink. So just a little comparison there, Mr. Chair, and Sidus Masi for your generosity with the time.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. Speaker Blas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to the panel, thank you very much for all of that that's here, and very informative. I guess one of the good things about being one of the last people to talk here is most of the questions were answered already. Okay, but there are a couple of questions I do have. With regard to the question about, or the answer that there were about 9 wells that were above the IAL 50% level. First off, before I start that, does anybody know what the half-life is of Dieldrin? What are we dealing with? How long? We don't know what the half-life is. Do we know what the half-life is of Dieldrin? In other words, when it's exposed, how long does it stay toxic, or how long does it? Okay, can we check on that, please? Because I do recall in a discussion with Weary that it has a half-life of about 4 years.
Mr. Speaker, I think we've got information that can be provided. Yeah, sure.
So in a previous hearing that I had, there was stated that if it was left out in the sunlight for 20 years, it would disappear.
Okay.
That's what it was said.
When was this banned? This
1987.
1987. Do a little simple math here. That's about 40 years ago. Right? So if it's got a half-life of about 20 years, and you have banned it for 40 years, it goes to question as to, okay, how did it get in our system? How is it in our system 40 years later when it was banned, 40 years ago, when it only has a half-life of 20 years?
So our theory is that, if it was used as a termaticide in building construction, that it was contained in the foundation. And so we believe that as these buildings were demolished, these foundations were uprooted, then it exposed the, Dieldrin or those pesticides that were applied to the foundation, and is now in, like not compacted soil, and could be easily washed through stormwater or as runoff in the loose soils.
And I appreciate that, because then you're going to demolish a building, even if, if you've got a compound that only have a half-life of about 20 years, you're going to demolish a building that's probably 50 years old. Chances are that it's already lost its potency. Well, that's a discussion, and I know the investigative part comes later, okay? And I'm just sitting here, I'm doing the math, doesn't equate. There was a mention, now I want to go back to the question as far as the 9 wells that have tested basically above the 50% level of the IAL. Are any of these wells, what's the connection of those wells that have tested 50% above to the 3 wells that we have in the 3 primary wells that in discussion today? Where are these wells located?
Two of those wells are A23 and A25, which have been shut down since 2016 due to PFAS contamination, and there is a treatment system currently being installed for those wells.
Where are they located?
Pardon?
Where are those wells located?
Well A23 and well A25 are on Route 4, just uphill from McDonald's.
Okay.
Agania.
Okay, so that's 2.
EX11, M3, and M4 are all in the same vicinity, and M2. So there are 4 M-series wells in the Atacao area that are over 50% of the IAL, but only M4 had high enough readings that GEPA deemed it needing permanent treatment installed.
Okay.
And then D18, which is relatively near D17, is one of the wells that is above 50% of the IAL.
And D18 is where?
D18 is directly in front of the Northern Public Health Building.
Okay. So generally, in all, other than the one above Route 4, isn't that on the volcanic side of the island as opposed to the limestone side?
The A23, 25 are still in the area that would be considered the northern lens.
Oh, okay. So how regular do you test now, the IAL, those 9 wells?
Monthly.
Monthly? And when was in your last
Monthly
test?
starting this month.
Okay. So when did you detect that you had these other 9 wells suspected or above the 50%? When were they determined to have that?
The 4 values that we used for the running average was from 2021 and 2024 data for those 4 quarters.
Okay. What was interesting, my last question is interesting, and it's found page 11 of your presentation, and it says on October 17, GWA received initial sampling results indicating that the GAC treatment is effective with no Dieldrin detected in water after GAC treatment. So the question that I have here is so the testing is done after the process or as it comes out of the ground?
Before and after. Before the GAC system.
Okay.
And after the filtration.
Okay, so you were very careful here to say that it was detected, there was no detection after the GAC treatment. Was there detection before that?
Yes,
Okay, at what levels?
1.6 and 1.7.
And so when it after the treatment, what was the levels afterwards?
Non-detect.
Pardon me?
No detection.
Non-detectable. Okay. So there is then that, while the treatment is effective, there's still the concern that the water coming out of the ground is still contaminated. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Is that the same with the 50% of the other 9? Or was that tested just coming straight out of the water? I mean, out of the ground.
That results, the one with the detect of 1.6 and was from Y15. So, yeah, that's the one critical well we have the interim treatment on.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify. And this was on October 17th. So October 17th, while we found a treatment system that would be able to mitigate the contamination, on October 17th, there were still levels far beyond what we now deem as unacceptable. When do we establish that threshold of being non-acceptable, knowing that we had this since back in 2012?
The interim action level was approved by our board in November of 2024.
Okay, but there could have been levels at 1.6 and above since as far back as 2012.
It's possible, correct, yes. It would, I guess, depend on their data.
Okay, but that's just more so on the EPA side as opposed to the GWA side, right? And as far as the testing results?
So they're required to test quarterly already for safe drinking water standards. So they have data taken every quarter for most of their wells.
Okay. So who brought the concern up to who as to why we need to then develop the IAL?
So when those US EPA, so that it's federal, so those federal investigators came to Guam, and then the one gentleman who also did the inspection back in 2012 said, oh, by the way, is there still dieldrin in your water? And so those of us who were, at the agency, well, what's dieldrin, and what do you mean? Is it still in our water? So, then we did our research, so this, we had to find this report. We also looked at historical, news articles. There was actually front page news in the Guam Daily Post in 2012 that talked about dieldrin, that reported on dieldrin on this report. And so, for those of us who were, new to our positions, we're like, oh man, this was actually, a concern back in 2012. So it was at that point when we were notified by this inspector that there was a problem, we started moving forward towards this IAL.
So am I correct? Did I hear this correctly, that there is no national standard as far as the regulation of dieldrin?
Right, because it was banned in 1987, US EPA did not feel that there would be a growing concern for dieldrin because theoretically it should no longer be in production or in circulation, that there would not, that if it's no longer available, then it theoretically should not be a problem as an environmental concern.
Okay. But this is now an obviously a problem here and as well as 5 other jurisdictions. And so what has been the communication? I mean, what's been your conversation with US EPA with regards to this? I mean,
So we were in communication with them the whole time to develop this interim action level. Even today, even as far as yesterday, having discussions about how to move forward with lifting the advisory if GWA is able to demonstrate continuous non-detect of Dieldrin in their drinking water. So, I mean, we meet with them weekly, even at this point where they're on federal shutdown. So we're in constant communication with them.
okay. So GWA, I mean, with all the mitigative measures that you've got going on right now, I mean, do you feel that you're finally getting hold of this situation? Or
I'm going to say yes. You know, with the results from Y15 non-detect, it's, you know, I'm going to say the ball started rolling to the treatments of the other facilities, but there's engineering behind it and procurement and contracts and whatnot.
So with this measure that you've also then implemented with residents in being able to either purchase or reimburse them for their filtration systems, is there any understanding as to how long is this going to happen in perpetuity, or is there a deadline to this? When can the residents who have participated in this program, how long can they expect, or what should they reasonably expect this assistance to continue?
Right. So our engineering is working currently to get the permanent system for Y15, and the expected completion is the summer of 2026. So to answer your question, that's the time period we're looking at with regards to the affected customers and the POEs that's as part of that program. So summer of 26 is where, you know, we're going to have a permanent system in place. But if I may, the lifting of the do not drink without filtration, that in my opinion, plays a role in this. And so we stated earlier, we're going to be testing every month. We're going to be, you know, verifying that there's still no detect every month from the water coming out of Y15, right? We anticipate the permanent system to continue to do the no detect in the summer of 2026. And so I'm going to say that's the time period we have in our minds with regards to the program being in effect.
Okay. The last question: is the testing just done just right out of the system, or is it? Do you also test, you know, downstream?
We test at the point of entry into the distribution for all the contaminants. In the distribution system, we test for bacteria and chlorine residual.
But if I may, because of this particular issue, the Santa Rosa zone, we have tested in the distribution system 8 sites, right? And we anticipate to do another round of samples and testing.
So you do test downstream? I mean,
correct. But
in the system.
In this particular Santa Rosa zone, but not like the rest of the island.
Why not? Why not?
Particularly for Dieldrin, kind of like what Jennifer had stated, we test for other contaminants, but specifically for Dieldrin, it's from the production well is where we test.
Wouldn't it be prudent? You just finished saying other than Y15, there were 2 other at least wells that you have concern wouldn't it be prudent to be able to test downstream from those wells as well?
Yes, it could be prudent, but like we stated earlier, D17 was shut off in July 31, and M4 was, yeah, recently. But to your question, I mean, would it be prudent? I mean, it's definitely something we can look into and confirm with our general manager. I mean, similar to what we did with the Y15 well.
It would help with community credibility, I would think. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker.
Senators, if I may.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just in the interest of public record and transparency, I realized Senator Barnes earlier mentioned that not everybody cares to look at the annual report, and it needs to be stressed a certain report. So I just want to make it clear that there are other pesticides that are detected in our entry point, in our wells, but they are well below the MCL. So I just want to make that clear because it seems like everyone here may think that there's only PFAS and Dieldrin that we have to be concerned about, but there are others, and it's in the report, and one of them is chlordane.
And that was one of my questions. One of my first questions, basically, is that what else is there that down the line those levels will become a concern. So, well, thank you for that. Panel, you're not dismissed yet, but we ask just to go back to your seats. We're going to listen to the residents and listen to their comments. And likewise, by 2 o'clock, we are not going to adjourn. We will recess at 2 o'clock, and we will convene again December 2nd at 2 p.m. Okay? This will be a continuous oversight hearing and been determined by the 3 oversight committees. On December 2nd, we would also be inviting Department of Agriculture to be a part of this discussion. So at this point, we want to call up the residents who have signed in. We have is Theresa Lavelle, Alan Silvestri. We have from the Jigo Mayor's Office, Pedro Blas, and Mayor Francis Lezama, as well as Conchita Taitano and John Martinez. You can come up to, yes. We're okay? Okay. Before we start, actually, because we're going over 4 hours, video has to reset, so we'll take about maybe 2 minutes to reset, and then we'll start back.